Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories, here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 36 years old. This happened in the Carson National Forest, just north of Taos in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains of New Mexico. The events I'm about to share still haunt my dreams, and there are nights I wake up screaming, convinced I can hear them coming for me again. I'd always been what people call an outdoorsy type. Growing up in Colorado, I developed a deep appreciation for the wilderness, the vast, untamed beauty of the mountains, the silence that wasn't really silence when you learned to listen. After my medical discharge from the Army, nothing heroic, just a badly shattered femur during a training exercise, I found solace in solo hiking trips. My therapist said it wasn't healthy, isolating myself after the trauma, but she didn't understand. Nature didn't judge. Nature didn't ask uncomfortable questions or look at you with pity. My golden retriever, Rusty, was my only companion on these journeys. He was 5 years old, with a copper coat that gleamed in the sunlight and an intelligence in his eyes that sometimes made me wonder if he understood more than he let on. He'd been a rescue, anxious, mistrustful when I first got him 3 years ago. We'd healed together, in a way. This particular trip was planned as a week-long excursion through the La Tire Peak Wilderness in the Carson National Forest. I'd chosen it because it was reported to be less trafficked than other areas of New Mexico. The fewer people I had to interact with, the better. I'd mapped out a route that would take me through alpine meadows, past high mountain lakes, and up to peaks that offered views stretching all the way to Colorado on clear days. I arrived at the Cabresto Lake trailhead on a Tuesday morning in early October. The aspens were at their peak, their golden leaves shimmering against the deep green of the pines. The air was crisp, carrying that distinctive autumn scent of decay and renewal. I parked my Jeep, shouldered my pack, clipped Rusty's leash to his harness, and set off. The first day's hike was exactly what I needed, challenging enough to quiet my mind, beautiful enough to ease my soul. We made good time, reaching the first campsite I'd marked on my map by mid-afternoon. It was a small clearing near Heart Lake, sheltered by a stand of pines. I set up camp, filtering water from the lake while Rusty explored the perimeter, nose to the ground, tail wagging. That evening, as I sat by my small campfire, I noticed Rusty's behavior change. He'd been lying beside me, but suddenly he was on his feet, ears forward, staring intently into the darkness beyond the firelight. "What is it, boy?" I asked, following his gaze. The forest was still, the only sounds the crackling of my fire and the soft lapping of the lake against its shores. Rusty growled, a low rumble in his chest that I rarely heard from him. "It's probably just a deer," I told him, though I reached for my knife instinctively. New Mexico had black bears, mountain lions. It paid to be cautious. Rusty wasn't convinced. He took a few steps toward the darkness, still growling, the fur along his spine raised. That's when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone gently knocking on wood. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. "Hello," I called, rising to my feet. "Someone there?" The tapping stopped. Rusty's growl deepened. I grabbed my flashlight, sweeping its beam across the trees. Nothing but pines and shadows. I whistled for Rusty to come back to me, and reluctantly he did, though he remained tense, his eyes fixed on the spot where we'd heard the tapping. "Just the wind," I muttered, more to convince myself than Rusty. But there was no wind that night. The air was still, almost unnaturally so. I added another log to the fire and settled back down, but the easy peace of earlier was gone. I found myself straining to hear, jumping at small noises. Rusty remained alert, occasionally growling at nothing I could see or hear. When I finally crawled into my tent, Rusty came with me, pressing his warm body against mine. It was a long time before either of us slept. Morning came with a heavy mist hanging over the lake. I woke to find Rusty already up, standing at the tent entrance whining softly. I yawned, rubbing sleep from my eyes. "Need to go out, boy?" I unzipped the tent, and Rusty bolted, not to relieve himself as I expected, but toward the trees where we'd heard the tapping the night before. I called after him, but he ignored me, something he rarely did. Cursing, I pulled on my boots and jacket and followed. The mist swirled around the trees, limiting visibility to about 20 feet. I could hear Rusty ahead, his paws crunching on fallen leaves and twigs. "Rusty, come!" A bark answered me, followed by frantic growling. I broke into a run, following the sounds. The mist seemed to part and close around me as I moved, as if it had substance, intention. I found Rusty at the base of a massive ponderosa pine. He was circling it, growling, occasionally lunging at the trunk. I approached cautiously, unsure what had him so agitated. That's when I saw the markings on the tree. At first, I thought they were just natural patterns in the bark, but as I got closer, I realized they were carvings, symbols etched deep into the wood. They formed a ring around the trunk at about eye level, intricate spirals and angular shapes that reminded me vaguely of Navajo sand paintings I'd seen in museums, but with a frenetic, chaotic quality that those harmonious designs lacked. And they looked fresh. The exposed wood was pale, the edges of the cuts sharp. Someone had carved these recently. Last night, maybe. "What the hell?" I muttered, reaching out to touch one of the symbols. The moment my fingertip made contact with the carving, a jolt like static electricity shot up my arm. I jerked back, heart racing. Rusty's growls intensified. Above us, the branches of the ponderosa suddenly shook, as if caught in a strong gust of wind. But again, the air was still. No wind, just the mist, curling and uncurling like spectral fingers. Something fell from the tree, landing with a soft thud at my feet. I looked down and felt my blood turn to ice. It was a doll, crude, made of twisted branches and pine needles. 2 acorns formed its eyes. A slash cut into the bundle of needles that formed its head created a grotesque smile. Wrapped around its middle was a strip of red fabric that looked disturbingly like the bandana Rusty had been wearing when we arrived at the trailhead. But I'd removed it last night before we slept. It should have been in my pack. Rusty was barking frantically now, backing away from the doll. I should have left it there. Should have packed up camp and headed back to the trailhead immediately. But curiosity, that damned human trait that's gotten our species into so much trouble, made me pick it up. The moment I touched it, the forest went silent. Completely, utterly silent. Even Rusty's barks seemed to be swallowed by some invisible force. The air felt thick, heavy in my lungs. And the mist began to coalesce, forming shapes that hovered just at the edge of recognition. Human-like, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, limbs at odd angles. I dropped the doll and grabbed Rusty's collar, pulling him back toward camp. He didn't resist this time. We ran, the silence giving way to a low, humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Back at camp, I quickly broke down the tent and packed up. Whatever was happening, I wanted no part of it. We'd hike back to the trailhead and find somewhere else to camp. Somewhere without carved trees and branch dolls and mist that moved with purpose. As I worked, I kept glancing over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The mist had followed us back to camp, hanging just at the edge of the clearing, never advancing but never retreating either. Finally, pack secured, I pulled out my compass to orient myself back to the trail. The needle spun wildly, never settling on a direction. I tried my GPS next. The screen showed only static. "Shit," I muttered, trying to remember the way we'd come. The trail hadn't been hard to follow yesterday, but with the mist, everything looked different. Still, I was an experienced hiker. I could find my way back. I shouldered my pack and set off in what I believed to be the right direction, Rusty sticking close to my side. We walked for what felt like hours, the mist never lifting, the forest unnervingly quiet except for our own movements and that persistent, barely audible hum. We should have reached the main trail by now. I stopped, studying the terrain. Nothing looked familiar. The trees were closer together here, older and more gnarled than the ones near our campsite. Some of them had the same symbols carved into their trunks. I was about to turn around, try another direction, when Rusty suddenly perked up. His tail began to wag, and he barked. Not the fearful sound from earlier, but his normal, friendly bark. He was looking ahead, into the mist. "Hello?" a voice called, female, hesitant. "Is someone there?" Relief flooded through me. Another hiker, someone who might know the way back to the trail. "Yes," I called back. "My dog and I are a bit turned around in this mist. Could use some directions." A figure emerged from the mist. A woman, probably in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore hiking gear similar to mine, a red jacket bright against the gray mist, and carried a pack that looked well used. Her face was pleasant, if unremarkable, with a dusting of freckles across her nose and green eyes that assessed me quickly. "Oh, thank goodness," she said, smiling. "I thought I was the only one out here. I'm Sarah Rodriguez." "Michael Williams," I replied, extending my hand. "And this is Rusty." She shook my hand. Her grip was firmer than I expected, and bent to pet Rusty, who was delighted with the attention. "You're lost too?" I asked. Sarah nodded, straightening up. This mist came out of nowhere. I was heading up to Heart Lake, but I can't seem to find the trail anymore. My compass is going haywire and my phone has no signal. "Same here," I said. "I camped at Heart Lake last night, but then—" I hesitated, unsure whether to mention the strange occurrences. She might think I was crazy. Then this mist rolled in, and I got disoriented. Sarah studied me for a moment as if sensing I wasn't telling her everything. "Well, two lost hikers have a better chance than one, right? Want to try to find the way together?" I agreed readily. Having company, even a stranger's, eased some of the dread that had been building inside me. We set off, Sarah suggesting we try to find higher ground where we might get a better view if the mist thinned out. As we walked, she told me she was a wildlife biologist from Santa Fe, doing field research on alpine ecosystems. I shared that I was from Denver, just looking to spend some time in nature. I didn't mention my discharge from the Army or my therapy, some things you keep to yourself, especially with strangers. The terrain began to slope upward, becoming rockier. We were climbing one of the smaller peaks in the area, though I couldn't be sure which one without my GPS. The mist remained thick around us, but Sarah moved confidently as if she knew where she was going. "Have you hiked here before?" I asked. "A few times," she replied without looking back. "The Sangre de Cristo range is beautiful, especially in autumn." I was about to agree when Rusty suddenly stopped, his hackles rising again. He stared ahead, a growl building in his throat. Sarah paused, looking back at us. "What's wrong with your dog?" "He's been on edge all morning," I explained, moving up beside Rusty and placing a calming hand on his back. "I think—" My words died as I saw what lay ahead of us. Through a break in the mist, I could make out a clearing. In its center stood a circle of stones, each about the height of a man, arranged like some primitive calendar or astronomical marker. The stones were covered in carvings, the same symbols I'd seen on the trees. "What the hell is that?" I breathed. Sarah followed my gaze, her expression unreadable. "Looks like an old ceremonial site. The Jicarilla Apache lived in these mountains before they were forced onto reservations. This could be one of their sacred places." I frowned, an uneasy feeling growing in the pit of my stomach. "Those carvings look fresh." Sarah shrugged, already moving toward the stone circle. "Maybe modern practitioners still use it. Native traditions are still very much alive in New Mexico." I hesitated, but Sarah was already entering the clearing. Reluctantly, I followed, keeping a tight grip on Rusty's collar. He resisted, trying to pull away from the stones, but I didn't want to be left alone. Inside the circle, the air felt different, heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. The mist swirled more actively here, creating shapes that seemed almost deliberate before dissolving again. The humming sound I'd heard earlier was stronger, vibrating in my chest. Sarah walked around the perimeter of the circle, running her fingers over the carved symbols. "These are fascinating," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "Not Apache, though. Older, maybe, or something else entirely." "We should go," I said, the unease growing stronger. "Find the trail." Sarah glanced at me, a strange smile playing on her lips. "Don't you feel it, Michael? The power in this place?" Something in her voice had changed, a subtle shift in cadence, in tone. I took a step back, pulling Rusty with me. "I don't feel anything except lost and concerned," I replied. "Come on, we're burning daylight." Sarah turned to face me fully, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. Her eyes seemed darker now, the pupils expanded until almost no green remained. "I wasn't lost, Michael," she said softly. "I was waiting. For you." "What are you talking about?" My mouth had gone dry. "The symbols called to you, didn't they? The doll was an invitation, and you accepted it when you touched it." She took a step toward me. "The old ones are hungry, Michael. They've been sleeping too long." Rusty was snarling now, straining against my grip on his collar. I should have let him go, let him run. He knew somehow what I was only beginning to understand. Sarah, if that was her real name, wasn't what she appeared to be. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, continuing to back away. "I'm going to find the trail now, alone." Sarah laughed, and the sound echoed strangely within the stone circle, multiplying until it seemed to come from everywhere. "You can't leave, Michael. None who enter the circle may leave without offering something to the old ones." She raised her arms, and the mist responded, thickening around us, obscuring the stones until only Sarah was visible, standing in a pocket of clarity while whiteness swirled around us. I turned to run, but there was nowhere to go. The mist was impenetrable, a solid white wall in every direction. Rusty's snarls had turned to whimpers, his brave front crumbling in the face of whatever power was manifesting. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice shaking despite my efforts to sound confident. "A sacrifice," Sarah replied, her voice overlaid with others now, deeper voices, older voices. "The ancients required blood to maintain the barriers, to keep the old ones sleeping in their prisons beneath the mountains." She gestured, and the mist parted to my left. I saw, to my horror, a stone altar that hadn't been there before, or perhaps it had, hidden by the mist. Dark stains marked its surface. Old blood. "No," I said, backing away until I felt the cold surface of one of the standing stones against my back. "This is insane. You're insane." Sarah's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too numerous, too sharp. "The Apache avoided these mountains for generations. The Spanish called them Sangre de Cristo, blood of Christ, because they said the peaks turned red at sunset. But that's not why." She took another step toward me. "They're red with the blood of sacrifices, centuries of them, keeping the old ones at bay." My mind raced, looking for an explanation, an escape. This couldn't be happening. People didn't just disappear in national forests in the United States. Search parties would be formed. Questions would be asked. As if reading my thoughts, Sarah laughed again. "Oh, hikers go missing all the time, Michael. Accidents, exposure, animal attacks. No one questions too deeply. And I've been doing this for a very, very long time." A memory surfaced. A news article I'd skimmed months ago about a hiker who'd disappeared in this same mountain range. They'd found his backpack, torn and bloodied, and concluded he'd been attacked by a mountain lion. His body was never recovered, Fear gave way to anger. I wasn't going to die here, victim to some psychotic ritual killer who thought she was serving ancient gods. I'd survived worse in the army. I glanced down at Rusty, who was pressed against my legs, trembling but still growling at Sarah. "Now," Sarah said, taking another step toward us. In her hand, a stone knife had appeared, obsidian by the look of it, its edge honed to wicked sharpness. "Will you come willingly to the altar, or must I compel you?" In answer, I released Rusty's collar and shouted, "Go, boy!" Rusty sprang forward, a blur of golden fur and fury. He hit Sarah mid-chest, sending her stumbling backward, the knife flying from her hand. I used the distraction to lunge to the side, hoping to break through the mist, find a way out of the circle. The mist parted before me, revealing not the forest I expected, but a misty landscape of twisted, leafless trees and soil that squelched underfoot, black and oily. I skidded to a halt, horrified. Where was I? What had happened to the mountain? Behind me, Rusty yelped in pain. I spun around to see Sarah holding him by the scruff of his neck, her strength impossible for her slender frame. Blood matted his fur where her nails, now long curved talons, dug into his flesh. "Your choice is simple," she said, her voice now completely transformed, resonating with age and malice. "The dog, or you. One must feed the altar today." "Let him go," I said, desperation making my voice crack. "Take me instead." Sarah's inhuman smile widened. "How noble! The Apache warriors who once made the same choice would be proud." She released Rusty, who fell to the ground, whimpering but alive. "Come, then. The altar awaits." I glanced at Rusty, silently urging him to run, to save himself, but he struggled to his feet and limped to my side, loyal to the end. My throat tightened with emotion. Sarah gestured impatiently. "Come, before I change my mind and take you both." I took a step toward her, my mind racing. There had to be a way out, a weakness in her power. The stone knife still lay on the ground where it had fallen. If I could reach it. As if sensing my thoughts, Sarah flicked her wrist and the knife skittered across the ground, coming to rest at her feet. She bent to retrieve it, her movements fluid, inhuman. That's when I noticed the red bandana, Rusty's bandana, tied around her wrist, the same strip of fabric that had been wrapped around the branch doll. A connection, a focus for her power perhaps. It was a desperate guess, but I had nothing else. As Sarah straightened, knife in hand, I lunged forward, not at her but at her wrist. My fingers closed around the bandana, and I yanked it free. The effect was immediate and shocking. Sarah screamed, a sound no human throat could produce. The mist around us churned violently, and the ground beneath our feet trembled. Sarah's form seemed to waver, like a television with poor reception, her features blurring and reshaping. "What have you done?" she shrieked, her voice fracturing into multiple tones. I didn't wait to find out. I grabbed Rusty, ignoring the pain in my bad leg, and ran blindly into the mist. Behind us, Sarah's screams rose in pitch and intensity, merging with the humming that had permeated the circle. The sound was physical now, a pressure that threatened to burst my eardrums. The mist whipped around us, sometimes clear enough to see a few feet ahead, sometimes so thick I couldn't even see Rusty at my side. I had no idea if we were heading toward the forest, the altar, or something worse, but keeping still wasn't an option. We burst through the mist into forest. Normal, misty forest, but undeniably real. The humming was gone, replaced by the subtle sounds of nature. Wind in the pines, the distant call of a bird. I staggered to a halt, gasping for breath, setting Rusty down gently. "You okay, boy?" I panted, examining his neck. The wounds were superficial, punctures that bled but weren't deep. He'd heal. Rusty licked my hand, his tail giving a weak wag. He seemed as relieved as I was to be out of that unnatural place. I still held the red bandana in my clenched fist. Looking at it now, it seemed completely ordinary. just a piece of fabric with a pattern of white swirls. But I wasn't taking any chances. I shoved it into my pocket, planning to burn it at the first opportunity. We needed to get out of these mountains. Now. Before Sarah, or whatever she was, recovered and came looking for us. Orienting myself was still a challenge with the mist, but the forest felt different here. Natural, not charged with that oppressive energy from the stone circle. I picked a direction that seemed to lead downhill, figuring that would eventually take us to a trail or a road. We walked for hours, the mist gradually thinning as the day wore on. Rusty stayed close, no longer exploring as he normally would on our hikes. His experience had subdued him, made him cautious. I knew the feeling. Late in the afternoon, we stumbled onto a dirt road. I nearly wept with relief. The road had to lead somewhere. Civilization, safety, or at least a chance to flag down a passing vehicle. We followed the road for another hour before a pickup truck approached, driven by an elderly Hispano man with a weathered face and kind eyes. He stopped when I waved, rolling down his window. "You look lost, amigo," he said, taking in my disheveled appearance and Rusty's injuries. "Very," I admitted. "My dog and I got turned around in the mist up in the mountains. Any chance you're heading toward Taos?" He studied me for a long moment, his gaze lingering on my pocket where I'd stuffed the bandana. "You been up near Heart Lake? The Stone Circle?" My blood ran cold. "You know about that place?" The old man crossed himself. "Bad place. Very bad. The old ones say spirits live there. Hungry ones." He leaned across the seat, pushing open the passenger door. "Get in. I'll take you to town." I hesitated only briefly before climbing in, helping Rusty up after me. The old man, who introduced himself as Miguel Hernandez, didn't ask for details about what had happened to us, and I didn't offer any. We drove in silence for a while, the golden afternoon light breaking through the dissipating mist. "The woman," I finally said as we approached the outskirts of Taos. "Sarah. She said she'd been doing this for a long time." Miguel nodded, as if this confirmed something he already knew. "There are stories. A bruja, a witch, who serves the old gods. They say she appears to lost hikers, gains their trust, leads them to the circle." He glanced at me. "You are very lucky, my friend. Few escape her." "Is she human?" The question sounded ridiculous spoken aloud, but after what I'd experienced, I needed to know. Miguel was silent for a long moment. "Once, perhaps. Long ago. Now, who can say what she is?" He nodded toward my pocket. "You took something of hers, something with power." I pulled out the bandana, hesitant to even touch it now. It was my dog's, but she took it, used it somehow. "A link," Miguel said, nodding. "Brujeria, witchcraft, requires connections, blood, personal items, anything that ties the victim to the witch." He pulled the truck to the side of the road, just before we entered Taos proper. "Burn it. Now. Before we enter town where she might have eyes." He produced a lighter from his pocket, and there, on the roadside, I set the bandana aflame, watching as it curled and blackened. The flames were unusually bright, tinged with colors that didn't belong in a natural fire. When it was completely consumed, I felt something lift from my shoulders, a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. Miguel drove us to a motel in Taos, refusing any payment for the ride. "Be careful," he warned as I got out of the truck. "She will not forget. The circle always demands its sacrifice, sooner or later." With that ominous parting, he drove away, leaving me standing in the motel parking lot with Rusty at my side. I checked into a room, washed Rusty's wounds, and then my own, scrapes and bruises I hadn't even noticed in the adrenaline of our escape. I should have felt safe back in civilization, surrounded by the comforting sounds of passing cars and distant conversations. But I didn't. That night, I dreamed of the stone circle. In the dream, Sarah stood at the center, but she wasn't Sarah anymore. Her skin was bark-like, her hair a mass of twisting vines, her eyes empty black pits. She was singing in a language I didn't recognize, her voice echoing off the stones. At her feet lay a doll, not made of branches this time, but of something that looked disturbingly like human skin, stitched together with coarse black thread. It had my face. I woke, gasping, drenched in sweat. Rusty was whining, pawing at the motel room door. Outside, a mist was rising, curling around the windows, though the night was clear when we'd checked in. We left Taos that night, driving straight through to Denver in my Jeep that Miguel had helped me retrieve from the trailhead. I kept the radio loud, windows down despite the cold, anything to keep from falling asleep behind the wheel. Rusty sat in the passenger seat, alert, watching the road ahead as if he expected Sarah to materialize at any moment. I haven't been hiking since, haven't set foot in a national forest or wilderness area. Rusty hasn't been the same either. He flinches at sudden movements, growls at shadows, and refuses to leave my side, even to play at the dog park near my apartment. Sometimes, when the weather is damp and gray, I catch a glimpse of mist behaving strangely, curling in patterns that seem deliberate, forming shapes just at the edge of recognition. I've started seeing symbols too, carved into trees in the park, scratched into the sidewalk outside my building, etched into the condensation on my bathroom mirror after a shower. Last week, I received a package. No return address, no postmark. Inside was a doll, smaller than the one in the forest but made of the same materials. Twisted branches, pine needles, acorn eyes. Around its neck was a strip of golden fur that I recognized immediately. Rusty's. He's been staying closer than ever, sleeping on my pillow instead of at the foot of the bed, watching me with worried eyes. He knows. Somehow, he knows she's found us. I've been researching protection symbols, consulting with practitioners of various traditions. My apartment is a fortress of salt lines, iron talismans, and protective sigils. I sleep with a knife under my pillow. Not that I think it would do much good against whatever Sarah truly is. Miguel was right. The circle always demands its sacrifice, sooner or later. I feel it calling to me in my dreams. The stone altar, waiting, hungry. I hear Sarah's voice on the wind, in the hum of my refrigerator, in the static between radio stations. You escaped, Michael, but not for long. The old ones are patient. They have eternity. You have one brief, fragile life. I'm writing this as a warning. If you're hiking in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains and the mist comes, unnatural, too thick, too purposeful, turn back. If you meet a woman named Sarah, with dark hair and green eyes that seem to consume the light, run. If you find symbols carved into trees, stones arranged in circles, dolls made of natural materials with two human features, leave immediately. Get in your car and drive until you reach a city, with its steel and concrete and electric lights. The old powers are still out there, in the high places, the wild places. Most of us live our lives never encountering them, protected by our ignorance and the sacrifices of those who came before. But sometimes the barriers weaken. Sometimes the hungry ones reach through, and sometimes they look just like us. I don't know how much longer Rusty and I have before she finds a way past my amateur defenses. I've thought about running further, leaving the country perhaps. But something tells me distance doesn't matter to creatures like Sarah. The connections have been made. The circle has been entered. The debt remains unpaid. If I disappear, don't come looking for me, especially not in the mountains of northern New Mexico. Just know that whatever was taken, whatever was sacrificed, it kept the old ones sleeping a little longer. Sometimes that's the best we can hope for. I think I hear knocking, that same rhythmic tapping from the forest. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Rusty is growling, facing the door, his body tense. There's mist seeping under the door, coiling across the floor like ghostly fingers. She's here. My name is William Brown, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the Gila wilderness of New Mexico just last summer. I still can't sleep through the night because of it. I've always been a loner. After my divorce 3 years ago, I threw myself into my work as a web developer, rarely leaving my apartment except for necessities. The isolation began to wear on me. The same walls, the same computer screen, day after day. My therapist suggested I needed a complete change of scenery, something to reset my nervous system. That's how I ended up planning a week-long solo hiking trip in the Gila wilderness. I'd never been much of an outdoorsman, but I figured I could handle it with proper preparation. I spent weeks researching trails, buying equipment, and watching survival videos online. By the time I set out for New Mexico, my confidence was high, perhaps dangerously so. The Gila Wilderness is one of America's first designated wilderness areas, 878,000 acres of forested mountains, deep canyons, and mesa country. I chose a trail that would take me past the Gila cliff dwellings, ancient homes carved into the cliffs by the Mogollon people hundreds of years ago. The park ranger who checked my permit warned me about recent mountain lion sightings but assured me they typically avoid humans. What he didn't warn me about was something far worse than any wild animal. On my first day hiking, everything went according to plan. The weather was perfect, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine. The trail was well marked and I made good time, setting up camp near a small creek as the sun began to set. I felt proud of myself as I ate my dehydrated meal by the campfire, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. That night, I slept soundly in my tent, exhausted from the day's hike. But just before dawn, I woke suddenly, my heart racing. Something had pulled me from sleep. A sound, I thought. I lay still, listening intently. There it was again. A faint whisper, like someone calling my name from far away. "William," it seemed to say, the voice carried on the wind. I unzipped my tent and peered out. The forest was still dark, the trees mere silhouettes against the pre-dawn sky. Nothing moved. I told myself it was just the wind through the trees, or perhaps a dream lingering in my half-awake mind. Still uneasy, I packed up camp earlier than planned and hit the trail as soon as there was enough light to see. The second day's hike took me deeper into the wilderness. The trail grew steeper as it wound up into the mountains, and I found myself stopping frequently to catch my breath. By midday, dark clouds had gathered overhead, and I felt the first drops of rain. I quickened my pace, hoping to reach the small cave marked on my map before the downpour began. I made it to the cave just as the sky opened up. It wasn't large, just a shallow indentation in the cliff face, but deep enough to provide shelter from the rain. As I set down my pack, something caught my eye. Markings on the cave wall. At first, I thought they were natural formations in the rock, but looking closer I could see they were carved symbols, similar to those I'd seen in photos of the cliff dwellings. Most were simple geometric shapes. Spirals, zigzags, concentric circles. But one symbol stood out. A crude stick figure with an elongated head and too many limbs, surrounded by smaller human figures. Something about it made my skin crawl, though I couldn't say why. I took photos of the symbols with my phone, then settled in to wait out the storm. As thunder boomed outside and lightning illuminated the cave in brief, harsh flashes, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Several times I turned quickly, expecting to catch someone, or something, standing at the cave entrance, but there was never anything there except sheets of rain. The storm passed by evening, leaving the forest dripping and the air heavy with moisture. I decided to camp in the cave rather than set up my tent on the sodden ground. After dinner, I tried to call my sister to check in as promised, but there was no cell service. Not surprising given my location. I made a note in my journal about the cave markings, then settled into my sleeping bag. That night, the dreams began. I was running through the forest, branches whipping my face as I fled from something I couldn't see but knew was terrible. The trees whispered my name as I passed, their voices growing louder, more insistent. William. William. Then suddenly I was in a clearing, and before me stood a figure, tall and thin, with limbs too long for its body and a face that shifted and changed as I watched, never settling on a single form. I woke, gasping, sweat-soaked despite the cool night air. The dream had been so vivid, so real. I fumbled for my headlamp and switched it on, the beam cutting through the darkness of the cave. For a moment, I thought I saw movement at the edge of the light, a tall, thin shadow retreating deeper into the cave. But when I directed the beam there, nothing was visible. Sleep eluded me for the rest of the night. I sat with my back against the cave wall, headlamp on, jumping at every sound, the drip of water, the rustle of leaves outside, the occasional hoot of an owl. When the first gray light of dawn appeared, I packed up quickly and left, eager to be away from the cave and its unsettling atmosphere. The third day brought clearer weather but an increasing sense of unease. The forest seemed different somehow, quieter, as if the wildlife was hiding. Several times I stopped, certain I heard footsteps behind me, only to find nothing when I turned to look. My map showed I was approaching an area called the McKenna Park, a high-elevation meadow surrounded by forest. As I hiked, I kept thinking about the cave symbols and my nightmare. The stick figure with the elongated head nagged at me. Where had I seen something like it before? Then I remembered, in the visitor center near the cliff dwellings there had been information about local Apache legends, including one about a creature called the Mountain Spirit or Crown Dancer. But this figure had seemed darker, more malevolent than the protective spirits described in the exhibit. By late afternoon, I reached McKenna Park. The meadow was beautiful, a vast expanse of grass dotted with wildflowers, surrounded by pine forest. In the distance, I could see the ruins of an old cabin. Its roof long collapsed. I decided to set up camp near the edge of the meadow, close enough to the trees for shelter but with a clear view of my surroundings. As I was gathering wood for a fire, I found something that made my blood run cold. Hanging from a low branch of a ponderosa pine was a small bundle of twigs bound with what looked like human hair. Attached to it was a small leather pouch. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Inside were small bones, too small to be human, perhaps from a bird or rodent, and a scrap of paper with the same elongated figure from the cave drawn on it in what looked like dried blood. I dropped the bundle and backed away, my heart pounding. Someone else was out here. Someone who knew about the symbol. Or maybe the symbol itself held some power I didn't understand. I should have packed up and hiked out right then. Later, I would wish desperately that I had. But darkness was falling, and I didn't want to risk getting lost at night. So I finished setting up camp, built a fire larger than necessary, and kept my hunting knife close at hand. That night I heard the whispering again. It started as the wind through the trees but gradually formed into words I could almost understand. Almost, but not quite, as if someone was speaking just at the edge of comprehension. The fire burned low despite my efforts to keep it going, the flames turning an unnatural blue-green color that cast sickly light across the meadow. Then I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the forest. Tall and impossibly thin, with arms that hung below its knees, it stood motionless, watching me. I grabbed my headlamp and shone it toward the figure, but the beam seemed to pass right through it, illuminating only the trees behind. "Who's there?" I called, my voice cracking with fear. The figure took a step forward, then another. As it moved into the dying firelight, I could see its face, or rather, where its face should have been. There was only smooth, bark-like skin stretched over a skull-like protrusion, with deep hollows where eyes should be. I scrambled backward, fumbling for my knife. "Stay back," I shouted, though I knew instinctively that this was not something that would obey human commands. The thing stopped, cocking its head like a curious bird. Then it spoke, not with its non-existent mouth, but directly into my mind. "William Brown," it said, its voice like dry leaves rustling. "You have come to my forest." I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Terror held me frozen in place. "The Anasazi knew me," the voice continued. "They left offerings. They showed respect. But you modern ones, you have forgotten." "What are you?" I finally managed to whisper. "I am the Whisperer in the Pines, the Shadow Walker, the Hollow One." Each name sent a chill through me. Some call me Casca Ansi, the Withered. I had read about Casca Ansi in my research, an Apache legend about a malevolent spirit that preyed on lost travelers in the wilderness. It was said to steal their essence, leaving behind only empty husks. I had dismissed it as superstition. Now, faced with this thing, I wasn't so sure. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice trembling. The Hollow One took another step closer. "Your fear, your pain, your life." It reached out one long, spindly arm, but slowly. "I have time." I ran. Abandoning my campsite, I grabbed only my backpack and fled into the darkness of the forest. Behind me, I heard a sound like laughter, high and thin and utterly inhuman. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. When I could go no further, I collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath. The forest around me was silent. Too silent. No insects chirping, no rustle of nocturnal animals. Nothing but my own ragged breathing. Fumbling with shaking hands, I pulled out my phone. Still no service, but I could use the GPS function on my hiking app to find my way back to civilization. To my relief, it showed I wasn't far from Jordan Hot Springs, a popular camping area where there might be other hikers. Safety in numbers, I thought desperately. As I started walking again, guided by the blue dot on my phone screen, I noticed something odd. According to the GPS, I was moving toward the hot springs, but the terrain didn't match what I expected. I should have been descending toward a river valley, but instead, I found myself climbing upward, the forest growing denser. After an hour of walking, I checked my location again. According to the GPS, I had made almost no progress toward the hot springs. In fact, it looked like I was circling back toward my abandoned campsite at McKenna Park. Impossible. I had been walking in a straight line, following the direction indicated by the app. Unless something was interfering with the GPS signal, or with my perception of direction. A twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, shining my headlamp into the darkness. Nothing. But when I turned back, the trail ahead had changed. Where moments before there had been a clear path, now dense underbrush blocked the way. The forest was changing around me. Or something was making me see changes that weren't really there. I took a deep breath, fighting down panic. I needed to think logically. The Gila River ran roughly east-west through this part of the wilderness. If I could find it and follow it downstream, eventually I would reach populated areas. And water flows downhill, so I needed to descend. I oriented myself using the stars, thank God for clear skies, and began making my way downhill, moving as quickly as I dared in the darkness. Every few minutes I would pause and listen, convinced I could hear something moving in the forest behind me. Not the sound of an animal, but a deliberate stalking. The Hollow One was following. Dawn found me exhausted, dehydrated, and increasingly disoriented. Several times during the night, I had found myself walking uphill again or in circles, despite my best efforts to maintain direction. It was as if the forest itself was conspiring to keep me lost. But with daylight came a renewed determination. I could see a valley below me now, with what looked like a river glinting in the morning sun. If I could reach it, I might find my way out of this nightmare. The descent was treacherous. Steep slopes covered in loose rock and fallen trees. Several times I slipped, once sliding several yards and barely stopping myself before going over a drop-off. My hands were scraped raw, and I had twisted my ankle, but I pressed on. By midday, I had reached the valley floor and found not the Gila River as I had hoped, but a smaller tributary. Still, it was water, and it had to flow somewhere. I filled my water bottle, dropped in a purification tablet, and rested for a few minutes while I consulted my map. Nothing looked familiar. According to the map, there were no tributaries in this area that matched what I was seeing. It was as if I had somehow wandered off the map entirely into unmapped territory. But that was impossible. The Gila wilderness, while large, was well documented. As I sat there, trying to make sense of my location, I noticed something carved into a nearby tree. The now familiar elongated figure, and beside it, a crude arrow pointing downstream. An invitation or a threat? I had little choice. Upstream led back into the forest where the Hollow One waited. Downstream might lead to safety, or it might be leading me exactly where the entity wanted me to go. But with my ankle throbbing and my supplies running low, downstream seemed like my only option. The creek led through increasingly narrow canyon walls. The sun disappeared behind the high cliffs, leaving me walking in perpetual twilight. The water grew darker, too, taking on a reddish tint that reminded me uncomfortably of blood. Then I saw the cave. It opened in the canyon wall just above the creek level, a dark mouth in the red rock, large enough to walk into without stooping. And around its entrance were carved dozens of the elongated figures, their limbs intertwining to form a grotesque border. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back to find another way. But as I stood there, indecision paralyzing me, I heard it again. The whispering, calling my name. William. William Brown. And now there were other words too, though I couldn't quite make them out. The sun was setting. Soon it would be dark again, and I would be out in the open, exposed and vulnerable. At least the cave offered shelter, a place to defend if necessary. I stepped inside, switching on my headlamp. The beam illuminated a passage leading deeper into the rock. The walls were covered with more carvings, not just the elongated figures now, but scenes depicting human-like shapes bowing before the tall entities, offering what looked like sacrifices. The passage widened into a chamber. My headlamp couldn't reach the far walls or ceiling, giving the impression of endless space stretching away into darkness. But what it did illuminate stopped me cold. In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, its surface stained dark with what could only be blood. Around it were arranged human bones, dozens of them from multiple bodies. Some were obviously old, the bones dry and yellowed. Others looked more recent. And seated on a throne of woven branches behind the altar was a figure that matched the carvings, inhumanly tall and thin, with limbs too long and too many joints. Its skin was like bark, cracked and gray. Its head was elongated upward with no features except two deep, dark hollows where eyes should be. The Hollow One, Casca Ansi, the Whisperer in the Pines. It wasn't alone. Around it stood other figures, human in appearance but moving wrong, with jerky, puppet-like motions. Their eyes were vacant, their expressions slack. One of them I recognized from a missing hiker poster I'd seen at the ranger station, a woman who had disappeared in the Gila wilderness 3 months earlier. "Welcome, William Brown," the Hollow One spoke in my mind. "You have come to my temple willingly. That pleases me." I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't obey. It was as if invisible strings held me in place. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "To feed," it replied simply. "To grow stronger. Your world forgets the old powers, but we remain, growing hungry in the shadows. Your fear sustains me. Your pain nourishes me. And when I take your essence, you will serve me, as these others do." It gestured to the vacant-eyed people surrounding it. Not dead, I realized with horror, but emptied. Their consciousness, their souls, devoured by this thing, leaving only shells that it could control. "The Mogollon knew to appease me with sacrifices," the Hollow One continued. "The Apache avoided my territory. But you modern ones blunder in, unaware and unprepared, easy prey. One of the hollow people approached me, a knife in hand. I struggled against the invisible restraints, to no avail. "Your essence will be particularly sweet," the entity said. "So full of fear, so full of despair. You have been feeding me since you entered my forest." The hollow person raised the knife. I closed my eyes, certain my end had come. Then my phone chirped. A simple sound, the notification tone for a text message. But it broke whatever spell held me frozen. I staggered backward, nearly falling. The hollow one hissed, a sound like steam escaping a pressure valve. "The technology," it spat. "It disrupts my power." I fumbled for my phone. One bar of service had appeared, just enough for a text to come through. It was from my sister. "Check in when you can. Worried about you." That simple message, that connection to the outside world, seemed to weaken the entity's hold over me in the chamber. The hollow people moved more sluggishly, and the oppressive atmosphere lightened slightly. I backed toward the cave entrance, holding my phone out like a talisman. The hollow one rose from its throne, its form seeming to stretch upward like a tree growing at impossible speed. "You cannot escape," it rasped in my mind. "This has been my territory for millennia. Every path leads back to me." But I had seen its reaction to the phone. Technology, human innovation, human connection. These were anathema to it. I turned and ran back down the passage toward the cave entrance, the phone clutched in my hand like a lifeline. Behind me, I heard a howl of rage and the sound of pursuit. Not just one set of footsteps, but many. The hollow people were giving chase at their master's command. I burst out of the cave into the last rays of sunset. Without hesitation, I plunged into the creek, hoping the water might slow my pursuers or hide my trail. The current was stronger than I expected, immediately sweeping me downstream. I managed to keep my head above water and my phone dry as the creek carried me away from the cave. After what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes, the canyon widened, and the current slowed enough for me to drag myself onto a sandbar. Night had fallen completely. In the darkness, I could see no sign of pursuit, but I didn't dare use my headlamp for fear of giving away my position. Instead, I checked my phone. The single bar of service was gone, but the GPS function still worked. To my astonishment, it now showed my location clearly. I was at the confluence of a small, unnamed creek and the Gila River, only about 5 miles from the visitor center where I had started my hike nearly a week ago. That was impossible. I had hiked much farther than that into the wilderness. Unless something had been manipulating my perceptions all along, making me think I was traveling one way when actually I was going in circles, always being herded toward that cave. I had no time to ponder this. I needed to move while I had a clear fix on my location. Ignoring my exhaustion and injuries, I set off downstream along the Gila River. According to my map, if I followed it, I would eventually reach a road crossing. The night was filled with sounds that might have been pursuit or might have been normal forest noises. Several times I thought I heard the whispering again, calling my name, trying to lure me back into the deeper wilderness. But I pressed on, focusing on the blue dot on my phone screen, slowly moving toward safety. Near dawn, I saw lights ahead, the road crossing and a small campground beside it. There were a few RVs parked there, their inhabitants not yet awake. I stumbled into the campground, probably looking like a madman, clothes torn, covered in scrapes and bruises, wild-eyed with exhaustion and fear. An older couple cooking breakfast outside their RV took one look at me and rushed to help. They gave me food and water while I called the ranger station. Within an hour, a park ranger named Martinez arrived to take my statement. I told him a sanitized version of events, that I had gotten lost, fallen, injured myself, and spent several frightening nights trying to find my way back to civilization. I said nothing about the Hollow One or the Cave of Horrors. Even in my exhausted state, I knew how it would sound. Ranger Martinez seemed to accept my story, though he gave me an odd look when I mentioned camping near McKenna Park. "You're lucky," he said as he drove me back to the visitor center where my car was parked. "We've had 3 hikers go missing in that area this season alone. Never found a trace of them." I thought of the hollow people in the cave and shuddered. Has anyone ever reported strange experiences in the Gila wilderness? Hallucinations, maybe, or encounters with something they couldn't explain? Martinez was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The Apache believed there were spirits in these mountains. Some benevolent, some not. They had stories about a particular entity they called Casca Ansi, the Withered One. Said it preyed on those who ventured into its territory without proper respect or preparation." He glanced at me. "But those are just old legends." We rode in silence for a while, then he added, almost casually, "You know what's strange? Your campsite at McKenna Park, we found it when we were searching for you. Everything was there. Tent, supplies, even your fire still smoldering. But there were no footprints leading away from it. None at all, in any direction. It was as if you had simply vanished into thin air. I had no response to that. How could I explain what had happened when I didn't fully understand it myself?" When we reached my car, Ranger Martinez handed me a small object, a leather pouch identical to the one I had found in the forest. "This was on your windshield," he said. "Thought it might be yours." With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was a small scrap of paper with a message written in what looked like dried blood. "I will find you again, William Brown." I dropped the pouch with a cry of alarm. Martinez stared at me, concern and something else, fear, in his eyes. "You saw something out there, didn't you?" he asked quietly. "Something that wasn't natural." I couldn't bring myself to answer. Instead, I mumbled thanks for his help, got in my car, and drove away as fast as I legally could. I didn't stop until I reached Albuquerque, where I checked into the first motel I saw and collapsed into exhausted sleep. That was 3 months ago. I've since moved to Boston, as far from the Gila wilderness as I could reasonably get. I've told no one the full story until now. Most nights I still wake up in a cold sweat, hearing the whispers calling my name. And sometimes when I look out my apartment window at night, I see a tall, thin figure standing under the streetlight. A figure with too many joints in its limbs and a head that stretches upward into the darkness. It never approaches, never moves. It simply watches, waiting. Because we both know that one day my curiosity or my madness will drive me back to the Gila wilderness, back to the cave, back to the Hollow One. And next time, there will be no fortuitous text message to save me. Next time, I will join the ranks of the Hollow people, an empty vessel serving an ancient hunger that never dies. My name is James Anderson, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the Gila National Forest in New Mexico during what was supposed to be a therapeutic hiking trip to help me process my divorce. I'd always loved the outdoors, but since Sarah left, I'd become something of a hermit, rarely leaving my apartment in Albuquerque except for work. My therapist suggested reconnecting with nature might help clear my head. If only I'd chosen somewhere else. The Gila wilderness had always fascinated me. Over 500,000 acres of rugged mountains, deep canyons, and sprawling pine forests. I planned a 5-day solo hike around the Middle Fork Trail, packing light but thoroughly. I brought my satellite phone in case of emergencies, though cell service would be non-existent. The isolation was precisely what I needed, or so I thought. I arrived at the trailhead on a crisp October morning. The air had that perfect autumn sharpness, carrying the scent of pine and earth. I parked at the Gila Cliff Dwellings National Monument Visitor Center, double-checked my gear, and headed out. The ancient cliff dwellings loomed above, stone structures built into the caverns by the Mogollon people centuries ago. They seemed to watch me begin my journey, their empty windows like vacant eyes. The first day was everything I hoped for. I hiked about 8 miles, following the path alongside the Gila River. The water burbled peacefully, creating a soothing soundtrack as I walked. I spotted deer drinking from the river and a golden eagle soaring overhead. For the first time in months, my mind wasn't racing with thoughts of failure and betrayal. I set up camp in a small clearing near the river, built a fire, and slept soundly under the stars. The second day began normally enough. I packed up camp after breakfast and continued along the trail. Around midday, I noticed the first oddity. The forest had gone utterly silent. No birds sang, no insects buzzed, nothing stirred in the underbrush. I've spent enough time in wilderness areas to know that's never a good sign. Usually, it means a predator's nearby, a mountain lion or bear perhaps. I instinctively reached for the bear spray on my belt and scanned my surroundings. Nothing seemed immediately threatening, so I continued hiking, albeit more cautiously. The silence persisted for nearly an hour before the forest sounds gradually returned. I chalked it up to a passing predator and tried to shake off my unease. That evening, I found a beautiful spot to camp near one of the hot springs the area is famous for. After setting up my tent, I soaked in the natural pool, letting the warm mineral water ease my tired muscles. The sun set in a spectacular display of orange and purple, and I felt truly at peace for the first time since Sarah told me she'd found someone else. I was about to turn in when I heard it. A whisper so faint I wasn't entirely sure it was real. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. James. I jerked upright, heart pounding. I'd told no one my name, had encountered no other hikers. I was at least 10 miles from the nearest road. "Hello," I called out, feeling foolish. The forest answered with silence. I blamed it on the wind in the pines or my imagination working overtime. I crawled into my sleeping bag and eventually drifted off to a fitful sleep. I woke to darkness and the distinct feeling of being watched. My watch read 3:17 a.m., the dead of night. Outside my tent, something moved. Not the shifting of a deer or the lumbering of a bear, but something deliberate, something that seemed to circle my tent with purpose. I lay perfectly still, barely breathing. My headlamp was within reach, but I hesitated to turn it on. Whatever was out there paused directly in front of my tent's entrance. I could see its shadow against the nylon, a vaguely human silhouette, but wrong, somehow. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that seemed too long. It stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then, that whisper again, closer this time, as if spoken directly against the fabric of my tent. "James, come out." Every instinct screamed danger. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cool night air. I reached slowly, silently for my hunting knife, clutching it like a lifeline. The shadow remained motionless for another long moment, then gradually retreated. By the time dawn broke, I'd convinced myself it had been a vivid nightmare brought on by stress and unfamiliar surroundings. I packed up camp quickly, eager to put distance between myself and the hot spring. I checked my satellite phone, thinking I might call for an early pickup, but the battery was completely drained. Impossible, since I'd charged it fully before the trip and hadn't used it once. The trail that day took me deeper into the wilderness, toward the heart of the Gila. The landscape grew more rugged, the forest denser. By mid-afternoon, I realized something was wrong with my navigation. According to my map and compass, I should have reached Jordan Hot Springs hours ago, but the trail showed no signs of approaching the landmark. I stopped to check my GPS device. It powered on but showed my location as constantly shifting, jumping miles in different directions with each update. I switched it off to save the battery and relied on my compass instead, only to find the needle spinning erratically, unable to find north. A creeping sense of dread settled over me. I'd hiked these mountains before. I wasn't an amateur. But now, with my electronics malfunctioning and even my compass unreliable, I felt profoundly lost. The sun was getting low, and I needed to make camp before dark. I found a defensible spot with my back to a large rock face and began setting up. That's when I noticed the carvings. They covered the rock wall. Crude, ancient-looking symbols intermingled with more recent etchings. Some I recognized as similar to Mogollon pictographs I'd seen in the cliff dwellings. Others were unlike anything I'd encountered before. Jagged lines forming distorted humanoid figures with too many limbs, spirals that seemed to move if I looked at them too long, and one recurring symbol, a tall, emaciated figure with antlers or branches sprouting from its head. Beneath these, carved in a shaky but modern hand, "It speaks with their voices. Don't listen." I should have left immediately, should have abandoned my camp and hiked through the night if necessary. Instead, I told myself it was just the work of locals trying to scare tourists, or perhaps other hikers with a dark sense of humor. I set up my tent a short distance from the wall, built a fire larger than necessary, and kept my knife close as night fell. The fire wouldn't stay lit properly. Despite using dry wood and tinder, the flames burned low and gave off almost no heat, casting weird, dancing shadows across the rock face that seemed to animate the carved figures. I added more wood, but the fire continued to struggle, occasionally flaring with an odd bluish tint before dying down again. I tried to eat, but my appetite had vanished. The forest had gone silent again, but not entirely. There was a sound just at the edge of hearing, a soft rustling that always seemed to come from just behind me, no matter which way I turned. As the darkness deepened, the temperature dropped dramatically. My breath clouded in front of me, and frost began forming on my tent despite it being only October. I huddled closer to my inadequate fire, exhaustion warring with fear. Then the whispers started again, more numerous this time, like multiple voices overlapping. "James, we've been waiting for you. Come to us, James. Sarah sent us, James." That last one froze my blood. How could anything here know about Sarah? I hadn't told a soul where I was going except my therapist, and I certainly hadn't mentioned my ex-wife's name to anyone in the forest. "Who's there?" I shouted, standing up and brandishing my knife. "Show yourself." The whispers answered with soft, mocking laughter that seemed to come from all directions at once. The fire abruptly went out, plunging the camp into darkness. I fumbled for my headlamp and switched it on, the beam cutting through the blackness. What I saw made me question my sanity. Just outside the circle where my firelight had reached stood a figure. It had the basic shape of a man but stood nearly 8 feet tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed too long and jointed in too many places. Its skin, if it could be called that, was a mosaic of bark-like patches and what looked like desiccated flesh. Atop its head rose a crown of branches that reminded me of deer antlers but twisted into unnatural shapes. Its face was the worst part, featureless except for 2 deep-set eyes that reflected my light with a sickly yellow glow, and a mouth that split its head nearly in half, filled with needle-like teeth. I stood, paralyzed, unable to process what I was seeing. The creature took a step forward, moving with a jerky, unnatural gait. "Stay back," I yelled, voice breaking with terror. It tilted its head at an impossible angle, regarding me with those terrible glowing eyes. When it spoke, its mouth didn't move, but the whisper came directly into my mind. "We are El Silbon. We have waited so long for someone like you, James, someone broken, someone whose soul is already half in our world." At the sound of that name, El Silbon, fragments of memory stirred. A Venezuelan legend my college roommate had told me about. The Whistler, a damned soul who preys on the unwary in the wilderness. But what was such an entity doing in New Mexico? As if reading my thoughts, the thing's mouth stretched into a grotesque approximation of a smile. "We are many. We take many forms. The Navajo call us skinwalkers. The Mexicans, El Silbon. The Jicarilla Apache named us Chenu. Names are nothing. Hunger is everything." It took another step closer, and the air around it seemed to distort, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. Behind it, more shapes began to emerge from the darkness. Similar creatures in various stages of transformation between human and something else, their features twisted and wrong. I did the only thing I could. I ran. I I abandoned my camp, taking only my knife and headlamp, and plunged into the forest. Branches whipped at my face, roots seemed to rise up to trip me, but I ran with the blind panic of prey fleeing a predator. Behind me, the whispers grew into a chorus, calling my name, promising relief if I would only stop, turn around, join them. One voice cut through the others, Sarah's voice, perfect in every inflection, calling to me the way she used to when we were happy. "James, please wait. I made a mistake. I came to find you." It was so convincing that I nearly stopped. Some part of me knew it couldn't be her, but hearing her voice after months of silence was like a physical blow. I faltered, slowing momentarily. That hesitation nearly cost me my life. Something cold and unnaturally strong grabbed my ankle. I looked down to see what looked like a human hand emerging from the ground itself, fingers elongated into claw-like appendages that dug into my flesh. I slashed at it with my knife, feeling the blade connect with something that was neither flesh nor wood, but some horrible combination. The thing released me with a hiss, and I resumed my desperate flight. I had no idea where I was going. My only thought was to put distance between myself and those things. I crashed through underbrush, splashed across streams, scrambled up slopes, always moving, even as my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. Dawn found me huddled in the hollow of a lightning-struck tree, shivering with cold and fear. In the growing light, I examined my ankle where the thing had grabbed me. 5 perfect bruises marked the skin, already darkening to a sickly purple. Around each bruise, my veins were visible beneath the skin, darkened as if infected. My headlamp had died hours ago. My knife was still clutched in my hand, its blade smeared with a black, tar-like substance that gave off a faint, repulsive odor. I was lost, injured, and had no supplies. My only hope was to find my way back to civilization before nightfall. I oriented myself by the rising sun and began walking east, hoping to eventually hit one of the main trails or roads. The forest seemed different in daylight, less threatening, but still not right. The trees grew too close together in some places, with branches that intertwined in ways that sometimes formed cage-like structures. I passed a clearing where the ground was covered not with grass but with what looked like fine white hair. Around midday, I stumbled upon a small cabin, not marked on any map I'd studied. Hope surged within me. Perhaps whoever lived here could help me, or at least had a radio to call for assistance. The cabin was crude but solid-looking, built of local timber with a stone foundation. No vehicle was visible, no smoke rose from the chimney, but the place had an unmistakably inhabited look. Firewood stacked neatly against one wall, a small garden plot beside the structure. I approached cautiously, calling out, "Hello, is anyone home? I need help." No response came. I reached the porch and knocked on the door. When no one answered, I tried the handle. The door swung open with a creak. The interior was dim but tidy. A single room with basic furniture. A wood stove occupied one corner, a small table and 2 chairs in the center, a narrow bed against the far wall. Shelves lined the walls, filled with preserved foods, books, and various supplies. "Hello," I called again, stepping inside. Something felt off about the place. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, suggesting the occupant hadn't been there for some time. Yet on the table sat a plate with what appeared to be the remains of a recent meal, and a cup of coffee that still steamed slightly. I moved toward the cup, confused. That's when I noticed the photographs. They covered one entire wall, dozens of them, seemingly taken with an instant camera. Each showed a different person, all hikers judging by their attire, all alone in various wilderness settings. With growing horror, I realized I recognized some of the locations from my own hike. In each photo, the subject was unaware they were being photographed. And in each one, barely visible at the edge of the frame or partially hidden behind a tree, was a tall, thin figure with antlers. My hands trembling, I looked more closely at the most recent photos. The blood drained from my face as I recognized myself, setting up camp by the hot spring, soaking in the warm water, sleeping in my tent. All taken from a distance, all showing the same antlered figure watching me from the shadows. The final photo showed me from just the previous night, huddled by my struggling fire, the rock wall with its carvings visible behind me. But in this image, I could clearly see what I'd been unable to perceive in the darkness. A dozen of those creatures surrounding my camp, just beyond the firelight's reach, their elongated limbs reaching toward me. A sound from outside, footsteps on the porch, jolted me from my horrified trance. I looked frantically for somewhere to hide, but the cabin offered few options. I ducked behind the door just as it began to open. An old man entered, gaunt, weathered, with deep-set eyes and a wild beard streaked with gray. He moved with a slight limp, carrying a rifle in one hand and a rabbit carcass in the other. He didn't notice me at first, setting his kill on the table beside the cold coffee cup. When he turned and saw me, he didn't seem surprised. He didn't raise his rifle. He simply sighed, a sound of deep weariness. "You've seen them, haven't you?" he asked in a raspy voice. "The Whispers?" I nodded, unable to form words. "They've marked you." He gestured to my ankle with its darkening bruises. "Been hunting these woods for 40 years. Never seen them get so bold before. Usually they just watch, whisper, drive folks mad slowly." "What are they?" I managed to ask. "Don't rightly know what to call them. Apaches say they're ancient spirits gone bad. Mexican folks call them skinwalkers or El Silbón. I just call them the Whispers." He moved to a cupboard, pulled out a bottle of clear liquid and 2 glasses. "Used to be a forest ranger till I encountered them in '85. No one believed me, started hunting them instead." He poured 2 drinks and handed me one. "Moonshine, you look like you need it." I accepted the glass with shaking hands. Why me? Why did they target me? The old man, who eventually introduced himself as Frank Deering, took a long drink before answering. "They prefer the vulnerable, the broken. Makes it easier for them to get inside your head." He tapped his temple. "They feed on fear and despair, more potent than flesh." Frank explained that the Whispers weren't a single entity but a collective. Ancient spirits that had been corrupted over centuries. They couldn't fully manifest in our world except under specific conditions, but they could influence, terrorize, and occasionally claim victims who were psychologically vulnerable. "That infection on your ankle," he said, pointing to the darkening veins spreading from the bruises, "means they've started the process. They're trying to turn you into one of them." My blood ran cold. "Is there a way to stop it?" Frank nodded grimly. 3 ways this goes. 1. You join them. Mind breaks, body changes, you become a Whisper yourself. 2. You die trying to escape. 3. He trailed off, taking another drink. "What's 3? I pressed. "You fight back, kill one of them. They can be hurt. The black stuff on your knife proves it. Kill one, and the others back off for a time." He showed me his own scars, similar dark veins that had been burned into scar tissue. Cauterized mine. Hurts like hell but stops the spread. Then I started hunting them. Got one 9 years back. They've been avoiding me since. We spent the remainder of the day preparing. Frank dressed my wounds, applying a paste of herbs that stung fiercely but seemed to slow the spread of the infection. He showed me how to make special ammunition. Bullets carved with symbols and filled with a mixture of silver shavings, salt, and herbs. "Won't kill them outright," he explained, "but it'll hurt them enough that you can finish the job with this." He handed me a knife unlike any I'd seen, the blade made of dark metal with similar symbols etched along its length. As sunset approached, Frank grew more agitated. "They'll come strong tonight," he warned. "They know you're here, know I'm helping you. They hold grudges." We barricaded the cabin as best we could, laying down lines of salt and iron filings across thresholds and windowsills. Frank explained that such barriers wouldn't stop them completely, but would slow them down. Night fell with unnatural swiftness. One moment, the forest was bathed in the golden light of sunset. The next, darkness seemed to rush in like a tide, enveloping the cabin. The temperature plummeted. Our breath frosted in the air despite the fire blazing in the wood stove. The whispers began just after midnight, soft at first, but growing steadily louder. They called both our names now, using voices we knew. For me, it was Sarah again, but also my parents, my childhood friends. For Frank, I could only guess whose voices he heard, but each one made him flinch as if struck. "Don't listen," he muttered repeatedly. "Not real. Not them." The cabin creaked and groaned as if under enormous pressure. The windows frosted over, ice crystals forming in impossible patterns, faces that formed and dissolved, reaching hands, antlered silhouettes. The fire in the stove died down despite our efforts to keep it blazing, the flames turning that same sickly blue I'd seen before. Around 2 a.m., the assault intensified. The whispers gave way to howls, inhuman sounds that seemed to pierce directly into the brain. The cabin shook. Cracks appeared in the windows. The door bulged inward as if something massive was pressing against it. Frank gripped his rifle, his knuckles white. "Get ready," he hissed. "They're coming through." The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. The salt line scattered. And there in the doorway stood the creature I'd seen before, the antlered thing with its 2 long limbs and nightmare face, flanked by 2 others of similar aspect but different forms. One seemed partially composed of shadow itself, constantly shifting and flowing. The other had a body that appeared to be made of intertwined branches and roots, with a face that was just holes in bark. Frank fired immediately, the special bullet striking the lead creature in the chest. It shrieked, a sound like metal tearing, and staggered backward. Black ichor oozed from the wound. I raised the pistol Frank had given me and fired at the shadow thing, my hand shaking so badly I nearly missed. The bullet grazed its shifting form, tearing away pieces of darkness that dissolved like smoke. The battle that followed was chaos. The creatures moved with unnatural speed, their limbs stretching and contorting to impossible lengths. They seemed to phase in and out of reality, solid one moment and insubstantial the next. Frank fought with the practiced skill of a veteran hunter, but even he was hard-pressed to keep them at bay. I emptied my pistol into the creatures, each hit causing them pain but not stopping them. When my ammunition was spent, I clutched Frank's special knife, backing toward the corner of the cabin as the shadow creature advanced on me. Its form rippled and changed, taking on Sarah's appearance for brief, horrible moments before dissolving back into darkness. It reached for me with limbs that seemed composed of living smoke, its touch leaving frost burns on my skin. "Join us," it whispered in Sarah's voice. "No more pain, no more loneliness." Something in me broke then, not in surrender, but in rage. All the pain of my divorce, the betrayal, the months of depression, it crystallized into a cold fury. This thing was using my deepest wound against me, wearing Sarah's face like a mask. "You're not her," I snarled and lunged forward with the knife. The blade sank into the creature's center mass, meeting resistance like cutting through thick syrup. The shadow thing convulsed, its form rippling violently. It released a sound beyond description. Not quite a scream, not quite a word, but something ancient and full of malice. Black ichor sprayed from the wound, hissing where it touched the wooden floor. I twisted the knife, driving it deeper. The creature's form began to collapse in on itself, the darkness condensing around the blade. With a final, silent implosion, it disintegrated, leaving nothing but a small puddle of that tar-like substance and a lingering cold spot in the air. Across the room, Frank had managed to seriously wound the root creature with his rifle, pinning it to the wall with a shot through what passed for its chest. He was now engaged in close combat with the antlered one, the El Silbón, as it had called itself. They grappled with unnatural strength, the creature's elongated arms wrapped around Frank like tentacles. I rushed to help, knife still dripping with black ichor. The antlered creature saw me coming and flung Frank aside with terrible force. The old man hit the wall with a sickening crack and crumpled to the floor, unmoving. Now it was just me and the thing that had been hunting me. It regarded me with those sickly yellow eyes, its mouth splitting into that horrible grin. "You surprise us, James Anderson," it whispered directly into my mind. "Most break by now. You will make a powerful addition to our collective." "I'm not joining anything," I spat, circling warily with the knife held before me. The creature moved with that same jerky, wrong motion, its limbs bending at impossible angles. It was playing with me, I realized, confident in its superiority. The infection from its touch was still spreading through my system. My vision was beginning to blur at the edges, dark veins now visible on my wrists and climbing up my arms. I knew I had only one chance. If I could wound it severely enough, maybe I could escape, find help, find a way to cure the infection. Frank had survived. Maybe I could too. The creature lunged suddenly, faster than anything should move. I ducked, but its claws caught my shoulder, tearing through my jacket and into flesh. Pain blazed, but I used the creature's momentum against it, driving upward with the knife as it passed over me. The blade sank into its abdomen, sliding between what might have been ribs. Unlike the shadow thing, this creature had substance, a horrible combination of flesh, wood, and something else I couldn't identify. It howled in pain and rage, its form seeming to flicker between solid and something else entirely. Black ichor poured from the wound, splashing onto my face and chest. It burned like acid, and I screamed as it ate into my skin. The creature thrashed, dislodging the knife and sending me tumbling across the floor. I scrambled backward, searching desperately for a weapon. My hand closed around Frank's fallen rifle. The creature advanced, ichor still leaking from its wound but moving with deadly purpose, no longer playing. "You will suffer for this," it promised. "Centuries of suffering. Your mind will remain while your body serves us." I raised the rifle with trembling hands, aimed at the center of its twisted mass, and pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. The creature's mouth split in that terrible smile again. It reached for me with those two long arms. A shot rang out, not from my rifle but from the doorway. The creature jerked, a new wound appearing in its head. It staggered, turning toward the new threat. Frank stood in the shattered doorway, his backup pistol raised, blood streaming down his face from a head wound. He fired again and again, each special bullet striking true. The creature convulsed with each hit, its form becoming less stable, flickering like a bad television signal. I seized the moment, grabbing the fallen knife and charging forward. With every ounce of strength I had left, I plunged the blade into the creature's chest, directly into what I hoped was its heart. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The creature went rigid, its limbs splaying outward. A scream built within it. Not in my mind this time, but physical, audible, shaking the walls of the cabin. Its body began to come apart, not dissolving like the shadow thing, but disintegrating, flaking away into nothing like ash in a strong wind. As it died, I felt something pull free from my mind, as if hooks I hadn't known were suddenly yanked out. The pain was excruciating but brief. When it passed, my thoughts felt clearer than they had since entering the forest. Frank collapsed to his knees, the pistol falling from his grasp. I rushed to him, supporting his weight. Blood matted his beard and his breathing was labored. "Did we get it?" he gasped. "Yes," I assured him, looking at the empty space where the creature had been. Only the knife remained, lying in a small pile of ash. "We got it." He nodded weakly. "Need to cauterize your wounds, stop the spread." The next few hours were a haze of pain. Frank, despite his own injuries, heated his wood stove until the poker glowed red and pressed it against the marks on my ankle and shoulder where the creatures had touched me. The pain was beyond description, but it worked. The blackened veins stopped spreading, gradually receding over the following days. We were too injured to leave immediately. Frank's diagnosis was a concussion and several broken ribs. I had burns, lacerations, and the lingering effects of whatever poison the creatures had introduced into my system. We barricaded the broken door as best we could, but nothing came that night or the next. On the third day, I was strong enough to help Frank to his ancient pickup truck, hidden under a camouflage tarp about a quarter-mile from the cabin. We made it to the small town of Reserve, where the local clinic treated our wounds without asking too many questions. Apparently, Frank had a reputation in the area as an eccentric but harmless old hermit who occasionally got himself into trouble in the backcountry. I stayed in Reserve for 2 weeks, recovering and helping Frank get back on his feet. The official story we gave was a bear attack, which everyone seemed willing to accept. During that time, Frank taught me more about the Whispers, what little he knew of their origins, their habits, their weaknesses. He showed me his journals, decades of research and encounters recorded in meticulous detail. "They'll be dormant for a while," he explained. "Killing one of the older ones, that antlered thing, that's a blow to them. They'll retreat, gather strength, but they don't forget, and they don't forgive." I understood what he was telling me. I was marked now, not just physically but spiritually. They would find me again someday, whether in the Gila wilderness or elsewhere. There were more of them out there, in other remote places where the boundary between worlds grew thin. Before I left Reserve, Frank gave me his special knife, the one that had killed 2 of the creatures. "You've blooded it now," he said. "It's yours. Keep it close." He also gave me a small leather-bound book, a field guide of sorts containing everything he knew about fighting the Whispers and other things that lurked in the forgotten corners of the world. I returned to Albuquerque a changed man. The wounds healed, leaving distinctive scars that I keep hidden under long sleeves. I quit my accounting job, sold my apartment, and moved to a small house on the outskirts of Santa Fe. I started training, building strength, learning tracking and survival skills, studying the occult texts Frank recommended. It's been 2 years since my encounter in the Gila. I keep in touch with Frank through encrypted emails and occasional visits. Together, we've identified 3 more nests of the Whispers across the Southwest, one in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, another in the canyons near Los Alamos, and a third in the desert near White Sands. We're not the only hunters, it turns out. There's a loose network of people who have encountered these things and lived, who now work to keep them contained. I still struggle with nightmares. Sometimes I hear whispers at the edge of hearing, especially when I'm alone in the wilderness. I keep Frank's knife close at all times, and my walls are lined with protective symbols copied from his journals. Sarah called me once, about 6 months after it happened. She wanted to reconcile, said she'd made a mistake. For a moment I was tempted, the old wound still raw, but something in her voice triggered a memory of those whispers in the forest, and I politely declined. I'm heading back into the Gila next week. Frank's picked up signs of activity again. Hikers reporting strange sounds, electronic equipment failing, the forest going silent at unnatural times. We can't let another unsuspecting person go through what I did. The Whispers are gathering strength again, and this time, we're going to be ready for them. If you're planning a hiking trip in the Gila wilderness or any remote forest, remember this. If the woods go silent, if your compass spins, if you hear someone calling your name when you know you're alone, don't answer. Run. And if you see a tall figure with antlers watching from between the trees, pray it hasn't seen you too. My name is James Anderson, and now I hunt the things that whisper in the dark. My name is William Brown, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the Carson National Forest near Taos, New Mexico, just 6 months ago. I still wake up screaming most nights. The plan was simple: a week of solitude in the wilderness to clear my head after the divorce. My therapist thought some time alone might help me process everything, rebuild myself from the wreckage Sarah had left behind. I'd always been an outdoorsman, comfortable with isolation, so when I found an old hiking trail map of the Wheeler Peak Wilderness near Taos, I knew where I was headed. I packed light, just essentials: tent, sleeping bag, water purifier, dried food, first aid kit, compass, maps, knife, matches, headlamp. My satellite phone was fully charged, though reception was notoriously spotty in those remote parts of New Mexico. I wasn't worried. Isolation was the point. The weather that October morning couldn't have been more perfect. Crisp mountain air cutting through the golden aspen trees. The trail started at Taos Ski Valley, winding upward toward Williams Lake and the higher altitude backcountry beyond. I planned to veer off the main trail after the lake, heading into the less traveled eastern valleys that carved through the mountains. According to my map, there was an old Forest Service cabin somewhere in that region where rangers used to stay during fire seasons. I thought I might make that my base camp. The first day's hike was uneventful but beautiful. The aspens rustled in golden waves, occasionally giving way to stands of dark pines. The higher I climbed, the more the world below seemed to fade away. Sarah, the failed marriage, the empty house, all of it becoming distant problems belonging to another life. By late afternoon, I reached Williams Lake, its surface glimmering like polished obsidian against the rocky backdrop. I camped there that night, not yet ready to venture off the main trail. As darkness fell, I noticed how complete the silence was. No distant traffic, no airplanes overhead, not even the call of night birds or insects. Just perfect, absolute silence. I should have recognized it as unnatural, but instead, I welcomed it, falling into the deepest sleep I'd had in months. Morning brought fog, thick, soupy fog that clung to the mountainside. Checking my GPS, I marked the location of the ranger cabin and set off eastward, leaving the maintained trail behind. The terrain grew rougher immediately, with loose scree and thick underbrush slowing my progress. The fog didn't burn off as the day wore on. If anything, it grew thicker, twisting between trees like living tendrils. I hiked for hours, periodically checking my GPS to ensure I was still headed in the right direction. But something was wrong. According to the device, I should have reached the cabin by now, yet there was no sign of any structure. Worse, the GPS coordinates seemed to jump erratically, sometimes showing me a quarter mile from where I'd been moments before, though I hadn't moved. Satellite error, I told myself. Electronic equipment fails. I switched to my compass and map. The compass was no better. The needle spun lazily, refusing to settle on north. I felt the first trickle of unease crawl up my spine. I was an experienced hiker. This shouldn't be happening. I knew how to navigate using the sun, but the fog had grown so dense that the sun was just a vague brightness somewhere overhead. I decided to make camp and wait for clearer conditions. As I unpacked my tent, I realized the silence from the previous night had followed me. No wind in the trees, no birds, no scurrying of small animals. Nothing but the sound of my own breathing and heartbeat. Setting up camp took longer than it should have, and my fingers felt clumsy, and simple tasks like securing tent poles became frustratingly difficult. The fog seemed to rob me of depth perception, making everything appear flat and distant. When I finally had my tent erected, I crawled inside, suddenly exhausted beyond reason. Sleep came instantly, but it wasn't restful. I dreamed of something watching me from just beyond the fog, something tall and gaunt that moved with unnatural, jerking motions. In the dream, it called my name in Sarah's voice. I woke to darkness and the sound of scratching on my tent fabric. Soft, deliberate scratching like fingernails dragging across the nylon. I fumbled for my headlamp, heart hammering in my chest. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding muffled in the fog. "Is someone there?" The scratching stopped immediately. I finally got my headlamp on and shone it at the tent wall where the sound had come from. Nothing was visible through the fabric, no shadow or silhouette. I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The fog had transformed in the darkness. It now glowed with a faint, sickly phosphorescence, illuminating the area around my tent in a radius of perhaps 20 feet. Beyond that, absolute darkness. I swept my headlamp beam across the visible area but saw nothing that could have made the scratching sound. I was about to retreat back into my tent when I noticed the footprints. They circled my tent completely, barefoot human prints pressed into the soft earth. They hadn't been there when I'd set up camp, and they only went around the tent. There were no tracks leading away. Sleep was impossible after that. I sat huddled in my sleeping bag until dawn, knife in hand, listening for any sound. None came. The silence remained absolute, pressing against my eardrums like a physical weight. When gray morning light finally penetrated the fog, I packed quickly and set off again, hoping to find my way back to the main trail. I no longer cared about reaching the ranger cabin or having my week of solitude. Something was wrong with this place, and I wanted out. I tried to retrace my steps from the previous day, but nothing looked familiar. The terrain seemed to shift subtly when I wasn't looking directly at it. Several times I found myself walking in circles, recognizing a distinctive tree or rock formation I'd passed an hour before. By midday, I was forced to admit I was lost. My GPS still jumped erratically, my compass still spun uselessly, and the fog had only grown thicker. The silence, too, had deepened, if that was possible. I couldn't even hear the sound of my boots on the ground anymore, though I could feel the impact. That was when I found the cabin. It appeared suddenly through the fog, a small, weathered structure of dark wood and stone that seemed to absorb what little light filtered through the mist. It wasn't the Forest Service cabin I'd been looking for. This was older, cruder, like something built by settlers a century ago. The windows were intact, but so grimy that I couldn't see inside. The door hung slightly ajar. I approached cautiously, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But the temperature had dropped significantly, and the thought of shelter was too tempting to resist. I called out as I neared the cabin. "Hello? Anyone here?" My voice didn't echo or carry. The fog seemed to swallow it whole. No response came from the cabin. I pushed the door open wider with the toe of my boot. The interior was a single room, dimly lit by the gray light coming through the dirty windows. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth cold and filled with old ashes. A rough wooden table stood in the center, surrounded by 3 chairs. A narrow bed was pushed against the far wall, covered with what might once have been a quilt, but was now just a rot-spotted piece of fabric. What made my skin crawl were the walls. Every inch was covered with crude drawings in what looked like charcoal, and in places dried brown substances I didn't want to identify. The drawings depicted stick figures in various poses of torment, surrounded by taller, emaciated figures with 2 long limbs and featureless faces. But it was what sat on the table that turned my blood to ice. A framed photograph, modern, digital, clearly out of place in the ancient cabin. I stepped closer, drawn by a terrible certainty. When I saw the image, my legs nearly gave out beneath me. It was Sarah and me on our honeymoon 5 years ago, standing on a beach in Hawaii. I remembered the moment the picture was taken, remembered the feel of her beside me, the happiness that now seemed like it belonged to someone else's life. But our faces in the photo had been scratched out with something sharp, leaving ragged holes where our eyes and mouths should have been. I backed away from the table, my heart racing so fast I thought it might burst. This wasn't possible. No one knew I was coming here. I hadn't told anyone my exact destination, not even my therapist. I'd wanted complete anonymity, complete escape. A sound finally broke the silence. Wood creaking overhead, as if someone was walking across a floor above me. But there was no second story to this cabin, just a low ceiling of rough-hewn beams. I ran. Out the door, into the fog, not caring which direction I went as long as it was away from that cabin and whatever walked on its non-existent upper floor. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs trembled, and only then did I slow to a walk, gulping air that somehow never seemed to satisfy my need for oxygen. Night was falling again. I had no choice but to make camp once more. My hands shook as I set up my tent, and I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced that something was watching me from just beyond the limit of visibility. I didn't bother with dinner, having lost my appetite entirely. I just wanted to crawl into my sleeping bag and pray for morning. That night, the dreams were worse. I was back in the cabin, but now I could see through the holes scratched in our photograph. Behind the paper, where our faces should have been, something else looked out. Something with eyes like wet stones and a mouth full of needle teeth. In the dream, Sarah spoke to me from the photograph, her voice wet and bubbling as if she were speaking through fluid. "You left me," she said, though in reality, she'd been the one to leave. "You left me, and now I'm here forever. Soon, you will be too." I woke to find myself outside my tent, standing in the fog-shrouded forest. Sleepwalking, something I'd never done before in my life. My feet were bare and caked with dirt, and there was a metallic taste in my mouth. My knife was in my hand, its blade smeared with a dark substance. Fear became a living thing inside me, coiling in my gut. I hurried back to my tent to check my supplies, to make sure I hadn't damaged anything vital in my somnambulant state. Everything seemed intact, but as I was repacking my bag, I found something that hadn't been there before. A small cloth doll, crudely made with button eyes and a stitched frown. Around its neck was a piece of red thread, pulled tight in a miniature noose. I flung the doll away from me and finished packing in a frenzy. I had to get out of these woods, had to find my way back to civilization before I lost my mind completely. The fog seemed thinner that morning, which I took as a good sign. Perhaps I could finally get my bearings. I walked for hours, following what I thought was a downhill trajectory that should eventually lead me to a road or trail. The fog thinned further as the day progressed, and I began to recognize certain geological features from my topographical map. Hope flickered to life. I might actually make it out. Around midday, I heard the most beautiful sound imaginable. Human voices. Distant but unmistakable. I altered my course toward them, almost weeping with relief. As I got closer, I could make out laughter and casual conversation, though not the specific words. I broke through a dense stand of pines and found myself at the edge of a small clearing. In its center was a campsite. A large tent, a well-built fire pit with flames crackling merrily, and camping chairs arranged around it. 3 people sat in those chairs, their backs to me. "Hello," I called out, my voice cracking with emotion. "Thank God! I've been lost for days." The figures didn't turn or react to my voice. I moved closer, suddenly wary. Something about their stillness bothered me. "Excuse me," I tried again, now only a few yards behind them. "I need help. My navigation equipment malfunctioned and I've been wandering in circles." Still no response. I circled around to see their faces, and the world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. They weren't people. Not anymore. 3 camping chairs held 3 desiccated corpses, their skin blackened and shrunken against their bones, their eye sockets empty and crawling with beetles. They wore modern hiking clothes, now moldering on their frames, and their postures were conversational. One leaning toward another as if sharing a joke, another with its head tilted back as if laughing. They'd been arranged that way, posed. And recently, too. The fire in the pit was still burning strong. I staggered backward, a scream building in my throat but unable to escape. As I retreated, I noticed their backpacks propped against a nearby log. One had a name tag attached. Property of Alan Crenshaw. The name meant nothing to me, but it meant something to my fingers. Without conscious thought, I found myself unzipping my jacket pocket and removing a small leather wallet that wasn't mine. The driver's license inside showed a smiling man in his 40s, Alan Crenshaw from Santa Fe. My mind couldn't process what was happening. I didn't remember taking this wallet. I didn't remember coming across these people before. What else didn't I remember? A twig snapped in the forest behind me. I whirled around and saw a figure standing at the tree line. Tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Its face was hidden in shadow, but I could feel it watching me, studying me. It took a step forward, moving with that same jerky, unnatural gait I'd seen in my dreams, and it spoke with Sarah's voice. "William," it said softly, "you've been very busy." I ran again, crashing through the underbrush without regard for direction or safety. Branches whipped my face. Roots threatened to trip me, but terror kept me moving. I ran until I physically couldn't anymore, collapsing against a tree trunk, lungs heaving. When I finally caught my breath and looked around, I realized I was back at the cabin. The same cabin with the drawings on the walls and the mutilated photograph. It wasn't possible. I'd run in the opposite direction. Yet here it was, and the door was standing wide open. Night was approaching again, and with it, a bone-deep cold that seemed to rise from the earth itself. I was exhausted, disoriented, and terrified beyond reason, but I couldn't stay outside in the darkness. Whatever was happening to me, whatever was hunting me, I needed shelter to survive the night. With leaden steps, I approached the cabin door. The interior was exactly as I remembered. The ash-filled fireplace, the rough table with the photograph, the narrow bed with its rotting quilt. The drawings on the walls seemed to writhe in my peripheral vision, but when I looked directly at them, they were static. I built a fire in the hearth using wood stacked beside it, grateful for the warmth and light it provided. I pushed one of the chairs against the door, wedging it under the handle. A futile gesture, perhaps, but it made me feel slightly safer. Then I sat at the table, staring at the scratched-out photograph of Sarah and me, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was I losing my mind? Had grief and isolation broken something fundamental inside me? Or was something in these woods targeting me specifically, using my pain and guilt as a weapon? I don't know when I fell asleep, but I woke to whispers. Dozens of overlapping whispers that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. I couldn't make out words, just the urgent, conspiratorial tone of secrets being shared. The fire had died to embers, casting the cabin in a dull, red glow. The chair I'd wedged against the door was back in its place at the table, and I was no longer alone. A figure sat across from me, a woman in silhouette, her features impossible to discern in the dim light. But I knew her. God help me, I knew her. Sarah. My voice was a rasp. The figure tilted its head at an angle no human neck should allow. When it spoke, the voice was almost hers, but with something else underneath, like multiple voices layered together. "You shouldn't have come to this place, William," it said. "This is where the lost stay lost." "What are you?" I managed to ask. I could sense it smiling in the darkness. "I've had many names. The Navajo called me Yi Naldlushi, the Skinwalker. Spanish settlers knew me as El Silban. Loggers and hunters called me the Wendigo. Names don't matter. Hunger does." It leaned forward slightly, and in the dying firelight I caught a glimpse of its face. What I saw wasn't Sarah, wasn't human at all. The skin was stretched too tight over a skull that was almost but not quite the right shape. The eyes were too large, too dark, reflecting the embers like an animal's. "I've been watching you, William," it continued, "following your grief. It led you right to me, broken and alone, just how I like them. No one knows you're here. No one will look for you." Its hand reached across the table, fingers too long, joints too flexible, and caressed the photograph. "She doesn't miss you, you know. Already with someone new, already forgotten your name." Rage cut through my fear. "You're not real," I said with more conviction than I felt. "None of this is real." The thing that wasn't Sarah laughed, a sound like bones grinding together. "Oh, William, I'm the only real thing in these woods. Those 3 you found today, they were real too, until they met me." Horror washed over me as I understood the implication. "I didn't. I wouldn't." "But you did," it whispered. "Or rather, we did. Together. while you slept and I wore your skin. They screamed so prettily, William. You don't remember because you weren't meant to. Not yet. No. I shook my head violently. No, this is some trick, some hallucination. It stood then, unfolding to its full height, which was much taller than Sarah had been, much taller than any human. Its head nearly brushed the ceiling beams. Let me show you, it said, extending one long-fingered hand toward me. Let me show you what we've done together. Something in me snapped. I lunged across the table, knocking the photograph to the floor. My hands found the thing's throat, which felt wrong under my fingers, the trachea in the wrong position, the skin too cold and dry. It didn't resist, just watched me with those two large eyes as I squeezed with all my strength. It smiled wider, its jaw unhinging to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. That's it, it rasped through its constricted throat. Feel the rage. Feel the hunger. I felt something changing in me as I tried to strangle this creature, a spreading coldness that started where my hands touched its skin and traveled up my arms. My fingers began to elongate, the joints loosening, tendons stretching. The skin on my forearm split in hairline fractures, revealing something dark and mottled beneath. With a cry of horror, I released the thing and stumbled backward. My hands were my own again, but the memory of that transformation lingered like a physical pain. The creature straightened its head with an audible crack. 3 days, it said conversationally. That's my record. The longest anyone has resisted becoming like me. How long will you last, I wonder? You've already started the change, already done things you can't remember. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice breaking. Company, it answered simply. Eternity is long, and when there are more of us, the hunting is better. It stepped around the table toward me, moving with that jerking, disjointed gait. I backed away until I hit the wall. The crude drawing seemed to pulse against my back, as if something living was trapped between the wood and the charcoal. You don't have to fight it, the creature said, almost gently. The change is painful only if you resist. Ask the others. Others? It gestured toward the walls, and with mounting dread, I realized the drawings weren't just random figures. They were names, written over and over in increasingly distorted handwriting. Alan Crenshaw, Jennifer Lopez, Marcus Tully, and now, at the bottom, in what looked horribly like my own handwriting, William Brown. They're still here, the thing said. Parts of them anyway. Enough to keep me company. Enough to help me hunt. It was close now, close enough that I could smell its breath, like meat left too long in the sun. Its fingers brushed my cheek with surprising tenderness. I'll wear your skin first, it whispered. Take your shape into the world. Find other lost souls to bring back here. And when I return, you'll be ready to become one of us. Like little Sarah would have been if she'd come with you. At the mention of Sarah's name, something fierce and protective flared inside me. This thing might wear her face, speak with her voice, but it wasn't her, and it would never touch her. Not if I could prevent it. With strength born of desperation, I shoved the creature away from me and lunged for my backpack, which I dropped near the door. Inside was my hunting knife. Not much of a weapon against whatever this thing was, but better than nothing. The creature seemed amused by my resistance. It paced around me in a loose circle, its movements becoming more fluid, more human with each step. Its features shifted subtly, the two large eyes shrinking, the stretched skin softening into a face I recognized with painful clarity. "Do you really think you can hurt me, William?" it asked, now looking and sounding exactly like Sarah. "Do you really think you can escape what's already begun?" I held the knife out before me, trying to ignore how my fingers seemed longer on the handle, how the joints bent just a little too easily. "I don't need to escape," I said. "I just need to survive until dawn." Most forest predators hunted at night. It was a desperate guess, but the flicker of annoyance that crossed the creature's face told me I'd struck close to the truth. "Dawn is hours away," it said, "and the night is my time." It moved with sudden, blinding speed, knocking the knife from my hand and sending me sprawling onto the rough wooden floor. Before I could regain my feet, it was on top of me, pinning me down with strength that no human frame should possess. Its face, Sarah's face, hovered inches above mine. This close, I could see the seams where the disguise didn't quite hold, the moments when the skin rippled as something else moved beneath it. "I'm going to open you up," it whispered, "hollow you out and crawl inside. Your body will walk out of these woods, but I'll be wearing it." Its jaw began to unhinge again, the mouth opening wider than physically possible to reveal those rows of needle teeth. A long, gray-black tongue unfurled from the impossible depth of its throat. In that moment of pure terror, my hand found something on the floor beside me, a shard of glass from the broken photograph frame. With all my remaining strength, I drove it up into the creature's throat, where I'd noticed the strange anatomy when I'd tried to strangle it. The thing's scream was like nothing I'd ever heard, a high, piercing wail that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It reared back, clawing at the glass embedded in its neck. Black fluid that wasn't quite blood pulsed from the wound. I scrambled away, retrieving my knife and backing toward the door. The creature thrashed on the floor, its form flickering between Sarah's shape and something far less human, something with too many joints and skin like weathered leather. "You can't kill me," it gargled through its wounded throat. "I am this place. I am what waits in the darkness when you're alone." "Maybe," I said, reaching for the door, "but I can hurt you." I flung the door open and ran into the night, expecting pursuit at any moment. But nothing followed me from the cabin. The creature's screams faded behind me, replaced by that absolute silence that had been my first warning that something was wrong in these woods. I ran until I found a defensible position, a rocky outcropping that gave me a clear view in all directions. There, I waited for dawn, knife in hand, watching the shadows for any sign of movement. The night stretched endlessly, but no attack came. When the first gray light of morning finally broke through the trees, I felt a surge of hope. I'd survived the night. Now I just needed to find my way out of these woods. The fog was gone, burned away by the rising sun. For the first time in days, I could see clearly in all directions. And there, not half a mile away, was a trail. A real, maintained hiking trail with markers. I made my way to it cautiously, still expecting the creature to appear at any moment. But the forest remained still and empty. When my boots hit the packed dirt of the trail, I nearly wept with relief. According to the trail marker, I was on the Wheeler Peak Trail, just 2 miles from the Taos Ski Valley parking lot where I'd started my hike days earlier. 2 miles from civilization, from safety. I covered that distance in record time, fueled by fear and hope in equal measure. When the parking lot came into view, with actual cars and people moving about, I collapsed to my knees, overcome with emotion. A pair of day hikers found me there, dehydrated and babbling about cabins that couldn't be found and things that wore human faces. They got me to a hospital in Taos, where doctors treated me for exposure, dehydration, and what they diplomatically called stress-induced hallucinations. They found no evidence of the transformations I'd felt beginning in my hands and arms. The police found no record of any missing hikers named Alan Crenshaw, Jennifer Lopez, or Marcus Tully. They did find my campsite from the first night by Williams Lake, but reported that I'd wandered less than 5 miles from the main trail, circling back on myself repeatedly based on the tracks they found. There was no cabin, no clearing with posed corpses, nothing to validate what I'd experienced. I've tried to move on, to accept the medical explanation that isolation, stress, and the thin mountain air combined to create an elaborate delusion. Most days, I can almost believe it. But some nights, when I'm on the edge of sleep, I hear whispers coming from inside my walls. And sometimes, in the bathroom mirror, I catch a glimpse of my reflection when I'm not looking directly at it. My arms just a little too long, my movements just a little too jerky, and worst of all, sometimes I find myself writing the same 4 names over and over again, without realizing I've picked up a pen. Alan Crenshaw. Jennifer Lopez. Marcus Tully, William Brown. The doctors say it's a form of stress response, a way for my brain to process the delusion. They've increased my medication, suggested more therapy sessions. But they don't understand the truth. I didn't escape those woods. I brought something back with me. And it's patient. So patient, it can wait. My name is Jennifer Williams, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the remote wilderness of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in northern New Mexico, where the pine forests hide secrets older than history itself. I've always been the adventurous type. Growing up in a small town in Michigan, I dreamed of exploring wild places, of challenging myself against the raw elements of nature. After college, I moved west and built a life around those dreams, working as an environmental consultant and spending every spare moment hiking, climbing, or camping in the wilderness areas scattered across the American West. When my best friend Melissa Scott suggested we take a week-long backpacking trip to celebrate both of us turning 32, I jumped at the chance. We'd been friends since college, bonding over a shared love of the outdoors despite our different personalities. Where I was methodical and prepared, Melissa was spontaneous and free-spirited. She was the perfect adventure companion, level-headed in a crisis but always pushing me to step outside my comfort zone. I found this amazing route in northern New Mexico, she told me over the phone, excitement bubbling in her voice. The Sangre de Cristo Range. It's super remote, hardly any hikers this time of year. There's this area called Latier Peak Wilderness that looks incredible. Never heard of it, I admitted, already pulling up a map on my laptop. Exactly, that's the point. Everyone does the Colorado Rockies or Yellowstone. This place is a hidden gem. Ancient forests, alpine lakes, peaks over 12,000 feet. And, get this, there's all this local folklore about the mountains being haunted. I laughed. Of course you'd be into that. Oh, come on. Don't tell me you don't love a good ghost story around the campfire. I couldn't deny it. Our camping trips had always featured late-night ghost stories that left us both sleeping with one eye open, though we'd laugh about it in the morning. It was part of our tradition. Fine, I said. Send me the route details and I'll start planning. 2 weeks later, we were driving south from Colorado into New Mexico, my SUV loaded with carefully packed gear. The landscape changed gradually as we drove, the familiar Rocky Mountain terrain giving way to something different, more stark, more ancient somehow. The October air was crisp, the aspens blazing gold against the dark green of the pines. God, this is gorgeous, Melissa said, staring out the window as we wound through mountain passes. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, her face animated with anticipation. I can't believe more people don't hike here. We reached the small town of Cuesta by early afternoon. It sat nestled at the base of the mountains, a collection of adobe buildings and weathered storefronts that had seen better days. We stopped at the ranger station to check conditions and register our hiking plan. The ranger on duty was a stocky man named Mike, with a salt and pepper beard and deep lines around his eyes. He studied our planned route with a furrowed brow. "You ladies, sure about this?" he asked, tapping the map where we'd marked our intended path. "That's some rough country up there, and you're planning to be out for 6 days?" "We've done longer trips in tougher terrain," I assured him. "We're experienced." "I don't doubt it," he said, still frowning at the map. "But this area can be tricky. Weather changes fast, easy to get turned around, and cell service is non-existent once you're past the trailhead." "We've got a satellite messenger for emergencies," Melissa said, patting her backpack. "And Jennifer here has enough navigation tools to guide a ship across the Atlantic." The ranger chuckled, but his eyes remained serious. "Just stick to your route and be careful around Heart Lake. That area can be dangerous." "Dangerous how?" I asked. He hesitated. "Unstable terrain. Rock slides. Just be aware of your surroundings." He handed back our map. "And if you start feeling uncomfortable up there, don't ignore it. Better to cut your trip short than push your luck. It seemed an odd warning, but I nodded politely. Rangers often erred on the side of caution when advising tourists. "Oh," the ranger added as we turned to leave, "if you run into a guy named Jack Morgan up there, tell him Mike says he needs to check in. He's a local, lives off-grid up in the high country. Kind of a hermit, but harmless. He's been up there longer than usual this season." We thanked him and headed to our final supply stop at the town's small grocery store. While loading up on last-minute snacks, I noticed a bulletin board near the entrance plastered with faded missing person flyers. Most were yellowed with age, but a few looked newer. "That's a lot of missing people for a small town," I commented to the elderly cashier. She followed my gaze and sighed. "Those mountains take folks sometimes. Hikers get lost or hurt, or the weather turns. Search and rescue does what they can, but," she shrugged, a gesture heavy with resignation. "What about this one?" Melissa asked, pointing to a flyer showing a young woman with a bright smile. "This is dated just last month." "Ah, the Reynolds girl. Sad business," the cashier said, shaking her head. "College student from Albuquerque. Went up hiking by herself and never came back. They found her backpack by Heart Lake, but no other sign." Melissa and I exchanged glances. Heart Lake was on our route. "You girls be careful up there," the cashier added, handing us our change. "The Sangre de Cristo has moods, that's what the old-timers say. Sometimes it doesn't want company." We laughed nervously at that and headed back to the car. As we drove toward the trailhead, I noticed Melissa had grown uncharacteristically quiet. "Having second thoughts?" I asked. "No way," she said quickly. "Just thinking about what the ranger and that lady said. Kind of spooky, right? Perfect for Halloween season." "They're just being cautious," I reasoned. "Plus, small towns always have their superstitions. Remember those stories the locals told us about skinwalkers when we hiked in Arizona?" "Yeah, and we didn't sleep for 2 days after that," Melissa laughed, her mood lightening. "I'm fine. Just getting into the spirit of our spooky adventure." We reached the trailhead by late afternoon and spent an hour sorting gear and making final preparations. The parking area was empty except for one mud-splattered pickup truck that looked like it had been there for some time. "Probably belongs to that Jack guy the ranger mentioned," I suggested. The trail started out gently enough, winding through dense pine forest. Shafts of golden light filtered through the canopy, speckling the needle-covered ground. The air smelled of resin and earth, and the only sounds were our boots on the path and the occasional calls of birds hidden in the branches above. It felt good to finally be underway, the rhythm of hiking settling into my muscles, the weight of my pack already becoming familiar. We made camp that first night in a small clearing about 4 miles in. As darkness fell, we sat around a modest fire, sharing a flask of whiskey and watching stars emerge in the patches of sky visible through the trees. "To adventure," Melissa said, raising the flask in a toast before taking a sip. "To adventure," I echoed, accepting the flask from her. The whiskey burned pleasantly going down. "So," Melissa said, her face flickering in the firelight, "did I ever tell you about the legend of La Llorona?" I groaned. "Starting the ghost stories already?" "It's tradition, and we're in New Mexico. It's practically required." "Fine," I said with mock exasperation. "Tell me about this crying woman." "La Llorona," Melissa corrected, her voice dropping dramatically. "The weeping woman. They say she was a beautiful native woman who fell in love with a Spanish conquistador. They had 2 children together, but he eventually abandoned her for a high-born Spanish lady." She paused to add another stick to the fire, clearly enjoying the theatrics. Driven mad with grief and rage, La Llorona took her children to the river and drowned them. When she realized what she'd done, she drowned herself too. But she wasn't allowed to rest. Her spirit was condemned to wander the waterways, eternally searching for her lost children. "Let me guess," I said. "If you hear a woman crying near water, it's her?" "Exactly. They say she wanders along rivers and lakes in these mountains, weeping and calling for her children. And sometimes..." Melissa leaned forward, her face suddenly serious. Sometimes she mistakes living children for her own and takes them to their deaths in the water. Well, good thing we're adults then, I said dryly. Adults aren't safe either, Melissa continued, especially women. Some versions of the story say she's jealous of the living and will drag anyone to a watery grave if she gets the chance. Great. So we should avoid all water sources on this trip? That'll go well. Melissa laughed. Just don't go investigating if you hear a woman crying in the middle of the night. Sound advice for the wilderness in general. I'd say. We lapsed into comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to coals. The forest around us seemed to press closer as the darkness deepened, the spaces between trees filling with shadows. Did you hear that? Melissa asked suddenly. I listened intently. Hear what? I thought I heard singing. Really far away. I shook my head. Just the wind in the pines, probably. Melissa didn't look convinced, but she didn't pursue it. Yeah, you're right. Wind in the pines. We turned in shortly after, crawling into our small two-person tent. I fell asleep quickly, lulled by the day's exertion and the whiskey's warmth, but my rest was troubled by strange dreams. I dreamed of running through endless forest, pursued by something I couldn't see. I dreamed of dark water closing over my head, of hands pulling me deeper, and beneath it all, a woman's voice singing a haunting melody I almost recognized. I woke before dawn, my sleeping bag damp with sweat despite the chilly air. Beside me, Melissa slept soundly, her breathing deep and even. I lay still for a while, listening to the sounds of the forest and waiting for my heartbeat to slow. That's when I heard it, a soft, distant melody drifting through the trees. It sounded like a woman humming, the tune melancholy and strange. I held my breath, straining to hear better. The singing continued for several moments, then faded away so gradually I couldn't tell exactly when it stopped. Just the wind, I told myself firmly, or my mind playing tricks, lingering effects from my dreams. I didn't mention it to Melissa when we woke properly and broke camp. Day 2 would take us higher into the mountains, and I focused on the practicalities of the journey ahead rather than dwelling on nocturnal imaginings. The trail steepened considerably as the morning progressed, switchbacking up densely forested slopes. Our breath formed small clouds in the cool air, the elevation and exertion making conversation minimal. By midday, we'd gained enough altitude to emerge from the tree line in places, affording spectacular views across valleys filled with the red and gold of autumn aspens. Now this, Melissa said during one of our rest breaks, was worth the climb. I had to agree. The landscape was breathtaking. Rugged peaks stretching to the horizon, the clarity of the mountain air making distant features seem close enough to touch. We lingered longer than planned, soaking in the majesty of the place before continuing toward our second night's destination. The forest we re-entered after our alpine interlude felt different somehow. The pines were older here, massive trunks spiraling skyward, their lowest branches higher than a house. Little undergrowth survived in the perpetual gloom beneath the canopy. Our footsteps fell silent on the thick carpet of needles, giving the unsettling impression that we were moving through the forest like ghosts, leaving no trace of our passage. "Check this out," Melissa called, moving off the trail toward something I couldn't see. I followed reluctantly. We'd agreed to stick to the trail as much as possible. What Melissa had found was a small clearing containing the ruins of a stone cabin. Only portions of the walls remained, crumbling and covered in lichen, but it was clearly a human structure. Inside the ruined foundation, someone had arranged a circle of stones surrounding the blackened remnants of many fires. "This isn't on the map," I said, consulting the topographic map I carried. "Probably super old," Melissa suggested, running her hand along a moss-covered stone. "Maybe an old mining cabin? This area had silver mines back in the day." "Maybe." Something about the place made me uneasy. "Come on, we should get back to the trail. We've still got a few miles to go before our camping spot." Melissa hesitated, staring at the fire circle with unusual intensity. "Mel!" She blinked, as if coming out of a trance. "Sorry. Yeah, let's go." As we turned to leave, I noticed something odd. Carved into one of the larger foundation stones was a symbol I didn't recognize. It looked like a spiral with small marks radiating outward, like a stylized sun or star. Something about it triggered a memory I couldn't quite place, a flash of unease that slipped away as quickly as it came. We reached our planned campsite late in the afternoon, a relatively flat area near a small stream that tumbled down from higher elevations. The water ran crystal clear and ice cold, tasting of minerals and snow. "According to the map, we should reach Heart Lake by midday tomorrow," I said as we set up camp. "The place where that girl went missing," Melissa replied, her voice subdued. "We don't have to go there if you're not comfortable with it." She looked surprised. "Missing the highlight of the trip because of some local superstition? No way. I want to see it." We ate a simple dinner as dusk settled over the forest. The night was clearer than the previous one, the temperature dropping rapidly with the sun. We built our fire bigger in response, huddling close to its warmth. "No ghost stories tonight?" I asked as we watched the flames. Melissa smiled wanly. "I'm good, unless you've got one." I was about to answer when a twig snapped loudly in the darkness beyond our fire. We both froze, eyes straining to penetrate the wall of shadows surrounding our small circle of light. "Hello," I called, my voice sounding thin in the vast silence. No response came, but I had the distinct feeling we were being watched. "Probably just a deer," Melissa said, but she moved closer to me nonetheless. "Yeah, probably." Neither of us suggested investigating. Instead, we turned in earlier than planned, securing our food in a bear-proof container well away from our tent. Sleep came less easily that night. I lay awake for what felt like hours, listening to the small sounds of the forest, the creak of branches, the rustle of nighttime creatures, the endless murmuring of the stream. And once, just as I was finally drifting off, the soft, distant sound of a woman singing. Morning dawned cold and bright. Frost covered the ground and rimed the tent fabric, sparkling in the early sunlight. We packed quickly, eager to warm up through movement. Neither of us mentioned hearing anything unusual during the night. The trail that day led us steadily upward, the forest gradually thinning as we climbed. By late morning, we emerged onto a rocky ridge offering spectacular views of the terrain ahead, a series of ascending meadows leading to a bowl-shaped depression where Heart Lake presumably lay, though we couldn't yet see it from our vantage point. "Almost there," Melissa said, checking the map. "Should be just over that rise." She pointed to a grassy slope about a mile ahead. The meadows were beautiful, dotted with late-blooming wildflowers and the occasional stunted pine. But something felt off about the place. The usual mountain sounds, wind in the grass, birds, the buzz of insects, seemed muted, as if the land itself were holding its breath. I shook off the fancy and focused on the path ahead. We crested the final rise shortly after noon, and Heart Lake spread before us. I immediately understood its name. The lake was roughly heart-shaped, its dark blue waters reflecting the surrounding peaks with mirror-like perfection. A rim of golden aspens encircled part of the shoreline, their colors duplicated in the still water. "It's gorgeous," Melissa breathed. "Yeah," I agreed, though I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The beauty before us seemed almost too perfect, like a painting rather than a real place. And despite the sunny day, the lake's waters appeared unnaturally dark, hinting at significant depth. We made our way down to the shore, finding a flat area to drop our packs. According to our plan, we'd spend the night here before continuing our loop back toward the trailhead over the next 3 days. "Let's explore a bit before setting up camp," Melissa suggested. "I want to go all the way around the lake." "The whole perimeter? That's got to be several miles." "So, we've got plenty of daylight left. Come on, adventure time." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself agreeing despite my reservations. We took only the essentials: water, snacks, first aid kit, map, and compass, and began following the shoreline clockwise. The first portion of our circuit was easy going, a natural path winding among the aspens. The lake remained unnervingly still, no breeze disturbing its surface. About a third of the way around, the terrain became more difficult, the shoreline rocky and uneven. We picked our way carefully along the water's edge. "Look," Melissa said suddenly, pointing ahead. "Is that a cabin?" Through the trees, I could make out a small structure nestled against the rising slope behind the lake. It was rustic but appeared to be in good repair, smoke rising from a stone chimney. "Must be that Jack Morgan guy the ranger mentioned," I said. "The off-grid hermit." "Let's say hello," Melissa decided, already moving toward the cabin. I followed reluctantly. "He probably values his privacy, Mel. That's kind of the point of being a hermit. We're just being neighborly. Plus, he might have interesting stories about the area." Before I could protest further, we'd reached a small clearing containing the cabin and several outbuildings. The main structure was impressively built of massive pine logs with a covered porch running along the front. A wooden rack near the door held several animal pelts stretched for drying. Melissa strode right up to the door and knocked firmly. For a moment, silence. Then came the sound of movement inside, and the door swung open. The man who stood there was tall and lean, with a weathered face that made his age hard to determine. Anywhere from 40 to 60 seemed possible. He had a close-cropped gray beard and alert blue eyes that assessed us quickly. He wore faded flannel and canvas pants that had seen better days. "Can I help you, ladies?" His voice was deep and rough, as if unused to speaking. "Hi there," Melissa said brightly. "I'm Melissa, and this is Jennifer. We're hiking through and saw your place. The ranger in Cuesta, Mike, mentioned we might run into you. Said your name is Jack." The man's expression remained impassive. "That's right, Jack Morgan. Mike asked us to tell you that you need to check in," I added. His words, not mine. Something flickered across Jack's face. Annoyance, maybe, or concern. "Been meaning to head down that way, just got caught up in things." He studied us for a moment, then his stance relaxed slightly. "You two camping at the lake?" We nodded. "Mind some advice from a local? Don't. Camp in the aspens instead, away from the water." "Why's that?" Melissa asked. "Lake gets real cold at night. Mist rises. Easy to get turned around if you need to move in the dark." He paused. "And some folks find it hard to sleep with the singing." My blood ran cold. "Singing?" "Just the wind in the rocks," Jack said, though his expression suggested otherwise. "Makes strange sounds sometimes, like a woman singing. Old prospector's tale." Melissa glanced at me, eyebrows raised. I gave a tiny headshake, not wanting to mention that I'd already heard the phenomenon. "We'll keep that in mind," I said. "Sorry to disturb you." "No bother." Jack hesitated, then added, "You girls be careful. Stay together. And whatever you hear tonight, stay in your tent till morning." Before we could ask what he meant, he nodded once and closed the door. "Well, that was sufficiently creepy," Melissa said as we walked away. Very cabin in the woods, horror movie vibe. "Maybe we should take his advice," I suggested. "Camp in the aspens instead of by the water." "Because of some ghost story about singing?" "Come on, Jen. We came all this way to see the lake. I want to wake up to that view." I couldn't argue with the appeal of morning light on the water, so I let it drop. We continued our circumnavigation of the lake, the journey taking longer than expected due to the increasingly rough terrain. By the time we made it back to our packs, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the water. We set up camp on a flat area about 50 feet from the shore, compromising between the spectacular view and Jack's warning about the lake. As we worked, I found myself repeatedly glancing toward the silent waters, expecting... what? I couldn't have said. Dinner was a subdued affair. The day's exertions had tired us both, and the deepening chill as darkness fell encouraged minimal conversation. We sat closer to the fire than usual, seeking its warmth and light in equal measure. "Jen," Melissa said suddenly, her voice unusually serious, "have you noticed anything weird since we've been on this trip?" I hesitated before answering. Define weird. "I don't know, just off, like something watching us, and—" She lowered her voice, though there was no one to overhear. "I keep hearing things at night, singing, a woman's voice." Relief flooded through me. "You too? I thought I was imagining it." "So you've heard it?" I nodded. "Both nights. Very faint, but definitely there." "What do you think it is? Some kind of bird or animal we're not familiar with?" "Maybe," I said, though I didn't believe it. The voice had been too distinctly human. "Or maybe it's La Llorona," Melissa said with a forced laugh, "coming to drag us into the lake." "That's not funny, Mel." "Sorry." She poked at the fire. "It's just, I can't help thinking about that missing hiker, the college student, the one they found her backpack right here." "Let's not dwell on that," I said firmly. "We're experienced. We're being careful. We have each other. We'll be fine." Melissa nodded, but she seemed unconvinced. We turned in early, the excitement of reaching our destination overshadowed by a growing unease neither of us wanted to acknowledge. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and dream-plagued. I jolted awake sometime in the deepest part of the night, heart racing. Beside me, Melissa slept restlessly, murmuring something I couldn't make out. Outside the tent, the world was silent. Too silent. The constant background sounds of the wilderness had vanished, leaving an unnatural quiet that pressed against my ears like physical pressure. Then I heard it. The singing. Much closer now, clear and undeniable. A woman's voice, singing a wordless melody that made my chest ache with an unnameable emotion. It seemed to come from the direction of the lake. Against all better judgment, I unzipped the tent and peered out. The night was clear, stars speckling the sky, the waning moon casting enough light to see by. A mist had risen from the lake's surface, just as Jack had warned, hovering a few feet above the water like a ghostly blanket. And there, standing at the lake's edge, was a figure. The details were indistinct at that distance, but it appeared to be a woman in a pale dress, her long, dark hair moving gently though there was no breeze. She was looking out over the water, the source of the haunting melody that now seemed to fill the entire basin. I ducked back inside the tent, heart hammering against my ribs. "Mel," I whispered urgently, shaking her shoulder. "Melissa, wake up!" She stirred, blinking in confusion. "What? What's wrong?" "There's someone out there, a woman by the lake." Melissa sat up, instantly alert. "What? Are you sure?" "Positive, and she's singing. That's the voice we've been hearing." "Is it that guy Jack's wife or something?" "I don't think he had anyone else up there, and she's just standing there, staring at the water. It's creepy as hell." Melissa reached for her hiking boots. "Let's go see who it is." "Are you insane? No way am I going out there." "Come on, Jen. It's probably just another hiker, or maybe a local. We should make sure they're okay, standing out there in the middle of the night." "Jack specifically said to stay in our tent no matter what we hear," I reminded her. "Since when do you take life advice from random mountain men?" Melissa countered, already pulling on her jacket. "Look, I'm going to check it out. You can come or not." I swore under my breath, knowing I couldn't let her go alone. "Fine, but we stay together, and at the first sign of anything weird, we come straight back." "Define anything weird in this context," she said with a nervous laugh. "Weirder than a woman singing by a remote lake in the middle of the night," I conceded. We pulled on warm layers and grabbed our headlamps, though we left them off to avoid announcing our approach. The singing continued as we cautiously made our way toward the shore, the melody shifting and changing in ways that seemed to defy musical logic. As we drew closer, I could make out more details of the figure. A woman in what looked like an old-fashioned white dress, her hair falling to her waist. She stood perfectly still apart from the gentle movement of her hair, her back to us as she faced the water. We were perhaps 30 feet away when Melissa stepped on a dry branch, the snap like a gunshot in the quiet night. The singing stopped abruptly. The woman remained motionless for a long moment, then slowly began to turn. An overwhelming panic gripped me. "Don't look at her face," I hissed, grabbing Melissa's arm. "Run!" We turned and fled toward the tent, not daring to look back. Behind us came a sound that raised the hair on my neck, a wail of grief so profound it seemed to carry the weight of centuries. The sound grew louder, suggesting pursuit, though I still refused to look back. We reached the tent and practically dove inside, zipping it closed as if the thin nylon could offer any protection. We huddled together, breathing hard, listening. The wailing continued for several minutes, seeming to circle our campsite, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away. Then it changed, becoming something else, a woman calling, her voice desperate and pleading. "Please, help me," the voice called, sounding terrifyingly close to our tent. "My children. I can't find my children." "La Llorona," Melissa whispered, her face pale in the dim light. "It's her. It has to be." "It's not real," I insisted, though I was no longer sure what I believed. "It's just, please," the voice came again, heart-wrenching in its despair. "I'm so cold. Let me in." Something brushed against the side of the tent. A hand, fingers trailing along the fabric. We sat frozen, barely breathing, as the touch moved slowly around our shelter. The zipper of the tent door began to rise on its own, a finger's width at a time. "No!" I shouted, lunging forward to grab the zipper pull from the inside. "Go away!" The pulling stopped. For a long moment, silence. Then a sound I'll never forget. A laugh, soft and chilling, that held no humor but infinite malice. The presence retreated, the singing resuming but growing more distant, heading toward the lake. Neither of us slept again that night. We sat huddled together, headlamps on, watching the tent door and listening as the singing eventually faded to nothing. When dawn finally came, it brought a wave of relief so intense I nearly wept. "We're leaving," I announced, already packing my sleeping bag. "Now. Today." For once, Melissa didn't argue. "Yeah, back to civilization. I've had enough adventure." We packed with record speed, eager to be gone from that place before the sun climbed higher in the sky. As I was rolling up the tent, Melissa walked to the lake's edge, staring out over the water that now looked perfectly ordinary in the morning light. "Jen," she called, her voice tight. "You need to see this." I joined her reluctantly, following her gaze to the ground at the water's edge. There, clearly visible in the damp earth, was a set of footprints. Small, barefoot human prints leading into the water, but none coming out. "That doesn't prove anything," I said, trying to convince myself as much as her. "Could have been here before we arrived." Melissa pointed silently to something I hadn't noticed, parallel to the shoreline. Overlapping with the set leading into the water was another set of footprints. These were different. The impressions deeper and oddly shaped, more like hoofprints than human feet, though clearly bipedal. They led away from the water and disappeared into the surrounding vegetation. "I really want to leave now," Melissa said quietly. "Agreed." We shouldered our packs and set off without breakfast, following the trail that would eventually loop back to the trailhead. Our pace was faster than planned, both of us driven by the unspoken desire to put as much distance as possible between ourselves and Heart Lake. The day was clear and mild, was Ibeyun, perfect hiking weather. Under other circumstances, I would have enjoyed the spectacular scenery as we descended through alpine meadows back toward the tree line. But every rustle in the grass, every bird call made us start and look around anxiously. We paused only briefly for water and energy bars, reluctant to stop moving for more than a few minutes at a time. By mid-afternoon, we'd covered what should have been a full day's journey, reaching the forest's edge as the sun began its westward descent. "We can make it a few more miles before dark," Melissa said, studying the map. "There's a good camping spot by this creek." She pointed to a blue line on the paper. I hesitated. "A water source? Are you sure?" "We can't avoid water completely, Jen. Besides, it was the lake that felt wrong. This is just a normal creek." I wasn't convinced, but didn't have a better alternative. We pressed on, entering the forest as the light began to fade. The trees seemed to close around us. The sense of exposure we'd felt in the open meadows replaced by a growing claustrophobia as the shadows deepened. We reached the planned campsite with perhaps an hour of daylight to spare, a small clearing beside a cheerful stream that tumbled over rocks on its way downhill. Under normal circumstances, it would have been ideal. Now, I eyed the water warily. "Let's set up as far from the creek as possible," I suggested. We found a suitable spot at the clearing's edge and made camp efficiently, working together with the practiced ease of longtime hiking partners. As darkness settled over the forest, we built a substantial fire, neither of us willing to admit we were afraid of what might lurk in the shadows. "So," Melissa said as we sat side by side, watching the flames, "are we going to talk about what happened last night?" I poked at the fire with a stick. "What is there to say? Either we both hallucinated the same thing, or the local ghost stories are true," she finished. "La Llorona is real." "I don't know about that specific legend," I said, "but something was there. Something not natural. Those footprints, human going in, not human coming out." Melissa shuddered, like something changed form. "Maybe it was just an animal walking in the same spot as some earlier hiker," I suggested, not believing it myself. "You don't believe that?" "No," I admitted. "I don't." We fell silent, each lost in our own thoughts. The fire crackled, sending sparks spiraling upward into the darkness. The stream chattered endlessly over its rocky bed. "Do you think that missing hiker saw what we saw?" Melissa asked softly. "The woman by the lake?" The question hung in the air, neither of us willing to follow it to its logical conclusion. "Let's just focus on getting back to the trailhead tomorrow," I said finally. "We can cover the remaining distance in one push if we start early." Melissa nodded, but her expression remained troubled. We prepared for sleep methodically, securing our food and dousing the fire until only coals remained. The night was colder than previous ones, our breath visible in the beam of our headlamps as we crawled into the tent. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me. I lay awake, listening to the forest sounds and Melissa's even breathing as she somehow managed to fall asleep. Every splash from the creek made me tense, my imagination conjuring images of a pale figure rising from the water. I must have drifted off eventually because I jolted awake to Melissa shaking my shoulder. "Jen," she whispered, her face ghostly in the beam of her headlamp. "Someone's out there." I sat up, instantly alert. "What? Where?" "By the creek. I heard splashing, then footsteps. They're moving around our camp." I reached for my own light with trembling fingers. "Did you see anything?" "No, just heard it. It's been circling for about 10 minutes. We sat motionless, listening intently. At first, nothing. Then I heard it. Soft footsteps in the forest litter, moving with deliberate slowness around our campsite. They paused, then continued, drawing closer to our tent. "Hello?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is someone there?" The footsteps stopped. For a long moment, silence. Then a voice spoke, so close it could have been inside the tent with us. "You shouldn't have come to this place." I stifled a scream. The voice was Jack Morgan's. "What do you want?" Melissa demanded, her fear transforming to anger. "To warn you. Again. She's following you now. You saw her at the lake and she's marked you." "Who?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "The locals call her La Dama del Agua, the Lady of the Water. Been haunting these mountains since the Spanish first came. She takes different forms, shows different faces depending on what you fear most." "La Llorona," Melissa whispered. That's one name for her, Jack agreed. She appears to those who will listen, those who might be tempted to follow her into the water. And once she has your attention, she doesn't let go easily. What does she want? I asked. Company. Jack's voice grew solemn. She's lonely in the dark water, wants others to join her. The Pueblo people left offerings at the lakes and streams to appease her. Food, tobacco, jewelry. The Spanish tried exorcisms. Nothing works for long. So, what do we do? Melissa's voice cracked slightly. Stay away from water. All water, streams, ponds, puddles. Make it back to town by tomorrow night. And whatever you do, don't listen if she calls your name. Our names? I felt a chill at the thought. How would she know our names? She knows what she needs to know, Jack said cryptically. I'll stay nearby tonight, keep watch. But tomorrow, you're on your own. I've got my own reasons for being up here. Can't leave yet. Why are you helping us? Melissa asked. A long pause. Let's just say I've seen what happens when people ignore the warnings. With that, he moved away from the tent, his footsteps fading into the darkness. Melissa and I exchanged bewildered glances. Do you believe him? She asked. I don't know what to believe anymore, I admitted, but I'm not taking any chances. First light, we're out of here. The rest of the night passed without incident. Whether because of Jack's protective presence or some other reason, the singing didn't return. When dawn broke, we packed with record speed, skipping breakfast in favor of energy bars we could eat while walking. There was no sign of Jack as we broke camp, though I had the distinct feeling we were being watched as we shouldered our packs and hit the trail. The morning was gray and cool, the sky overcast, limiting visibility and casting the forest in gloomy half-light. How far to the trailhead? Melissa asked, studying the map. About 15 miles if we take the most direct route, I replied. It's doable in a day if we push. Let's push then. We set a brisk pace, stopping only for brief water and snack breaks. The trail descended steadily, winding through dense forest with occasional views of the valleys below. Under other circumstances, it would have been a pleasant, if challenging, day of hiking. Now, every step was driven by the need to reach civilization before nightfall. Around midday, the weather worsened. Clouds descended, enveloping us in swirling mist that reduced visibility to mere yards. Light rain began to fall, soaking into our jackets and plastering hair to our foreheads. Just what we needed, Melissa muttered, pulling her hood tighter. The rain intensified steadily, the trail becoming slick with mud and treacherous tree roots. Our pace slowed despite our best efforts, each step requiring careful placement to avoid falls. Water ran everywhere, along the trail, dripping from leaves, forming small rivulets that wound between the trees. I found myself stepping around even the smallest puddles, Jack's warning about all water echoing in my mind. By mid-afternoon, it was clear we wouldn't reach the trailhead before dark. The rain had become a downpour, and the trail was now partially flooded in sections. We need to find somewhere to wait this out, I shouted over the drumming of rain on leaves. Melissa nodded, water streaming down her face. There's a trail shelter marked on the map, should be about a mile ahead. We pressed on, heads bowed against the deluge. The forest had transformed into a water-filled nightmare, every surface slick and shining, the ground becoming increasingly boggy. The sound of rushing water grew louder, suggesting a stream or small river ahead, likely swollen with rainwater. The shelter, when we finally reached it, was little more than a three-sided wooden structure with a sloping roof, designed to provide backpackers with minimal protection in bad weather. Right now, it looked like paradise. We huddled inside, stripping off our soaked outer layers and spreading them over the wooden railings in a futile attempt to dry them. Outside, the rain continued unabated, forming a gray curtain that isolated our small haven from the rest of the world. Check the map, I said, wringing water from my hair. How far are we from the trailhead now? Melissa carefully unfolded the map, now damp despite being kept in a plastic case. "About 7 miles," she said after studying it. "But there's a problem. Look." She pointed to a blue line crossing the trail ahead, a stream we'd need to ford. "With all this rain, it's probably too high to cross safely." I studied the map, looking for alternatives. "There's another trail here that loops around, avoids the crossing. Adds a couple miles, but better than risking the water." "Agreed, no water crossings." Melissa folded the map carefully. "Think the rain will let up soon?" As if in answer, a crack of thunder shook the air, followed by an intensification of the downpour. "I'm guessing no," I said. "We might need to spend the night here." Melissa looked out at the darkening forest. "I don't like the idea of staying in this half-open shelter after everything that's happened. Anyone, or anything, could walk right in." "We don't have much choice. Setting up the tent in this would be miserable, and everything's soaked anyway." I tried to sound more confident than I felt. "Besides, we're miles from Heart Lake now. Maybe whatever's there can't reach this far." "Maybe," Melissa echoed, clearly unconvinced. We made the best of our situation, changing into our spare clothes, which were merely damp rather than soaked, and preparing a simple dinner using our camp stove. As darkness fell, we positioned our sleeping bags on the wooden platform, using our packs as pillows. The rain continued through the night, sometimes lessening to a gentle patter, sometimes intensifying to a roaring deluge. Sleep came in broken fragments, interrupted by thunder and the constant drip of water from the shelter's roof. And sometime in the darkest hours, the singing began again. It started as a barely perceptible melody beneath the sound of rainfall, growing gradually louder until it was unmistakable. A woman's voice, singing wordlessly, moving steadily closer through the stormy night. Melissa and I sat up simultaneously, clutching our sleeping bags around us as we stared out into the rain-lashed darkness. Our headlamps illuminated only curtains of water, the trees beyond lost in shadow. "It followed us," Melissa whispered, her face pale. "We don't know that," I replied, trying to stay rational. "It could be someone else caught in the storm, another hiker." "At this hour? Singing? Don't lie to yourself, Jen." The voice grew closer, the melody shifting to something that sounded almost like words now, though in a language I didn't recognize. Ancient Spanish, perhaps, or something older still. "Don't listen," I said, remembering Jack's warning, "and don't look if she appears." We huddled together, hands pressed over our ears, but it did little good. The singing seemed to bypass our physical senses, resonating directly inside our heads. Images formed unbidden in my mind, dark water closing over my face, the peaceful surrender to its embrace, the end of fear and struggle. "Jennifer." The voice called now, my name a haunting caress. "Jennifer, come to me. You're so tired, so afraid. I can give you rest." "She knows my name," I gasped, pressing my hands harder against my ears. "Mine too," Melissa said, her voice tight with fear. "She's calling me too." The singing changed, becoming a mournful keening that tore at the heart. Despite myself, I found my gaze drawn to the edge of our headlamp's reach where the rain fell in silver sheets. There, barely visible through the downpour, stood a figure. It was the woman from the lake, but changed. Her white dress was now soaked and muddied, clinging to a form that seemed subtly wrong. Too tall, too thin, joints bent at unnatural angles. Her hair hung in dripping ropes around a face I still couldn't see clearly. She stood unmoving in the deluge, water streaming from her outstretched hands. "Don't look at her face," I whispered urgently to Melissa. "Whatever you do." "Too late," Melissa replied, her voice strange and distant. "She's beautiful, Jen. So sad, but beautiful." I turned to see Melissa staring fixedly at the figure, her expression slackening. Before I could stop her, she began to rise, moving dreamlike toward the edge of the shelter. "Melissa, no!" I grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Don't listen to her. It's a trick." Melissa struggled against my grip, surprisingly strong. She needs help, Jen. Her children. We have to help her find her children. They're not real. She's not real. I held on desperately as Melissa tried to pull away. Mel, please, stay with me. For a moment, Melissa hesitated, some awareness returning to her eyes. Then she looked past me, toward the figure in the rain, and whatever she saw there overcame her momentary doubt. With sudden strength, she wrenched free of my grasp and stepped out into the downpour. "Melissa!" I screamed, lunging after her. I caught her just beyond the shelter's edge, wrapping my arms around her waist and dragging her backward. Rain soaked us instantly, cold as ice against my skin. Melissa fought me, clawing and kicking. "Let me go! She's calling me!" she cried. Through the curtain of rain, I saw the figure move closer, gliding rather than walking, leaving no footprints in the muddy ground. Her face was becoming clearer as she approached, inhumanly pale, with eyes like dark pits that reflected no light. Terror gave me strength. I hauled Melissa bodily back into the shelter, throwing her down onto the wooden platform. She immediately tried to rise again, but I pinned her with my weight. "Mel! Melissa Scott! Look at me!" I shook her roughly, desperate to break whatever hold the thing outside had on her. "It's Jennifer, your friend. Don't listen to her." Something flickered in Melissa's eyes. Recognition, confusion. "Jen, what?" "Stay with me, Mel. Focus on my voice." I held her face between my hands, forcing her to look at me rather than at the figure now standing at the very edge of our shelter. "Whatever you do, don't listen to her. Don't look at her." Melissa's gaze kept trying to slide past me, drawn inexorably to the thing in the rain. I shifted to block her view, maintaining eye contact. "Remember when we climbed Mount Whitney?" I said desperately, searching for something to anchor her to reality. "Remember how sick you got from those energy bars? How we had to stop every 20 minutes on the descent?" A faint smile touched Melissa's lips. You were so mad. But I waited for you. Every time. Because that's what we do. We stick together. The singing outside had risen to an inhuman wail, the sound boring into my skull like a physical pain. I couldn't block it out, couldn't escape the images it planted in my mind, my body floating in dark water, peace after surrender, an end to struggling. "Jennifer," the voice called, honeyed and seductive now. "Join us. Your friend is coming to me. Don't you want to stay together?" Despite myself, I felt my resolve weakening. What was the point of fighting? Wouldn't it be easier to give in, to follow the voice into the water, to let everything end? No. The thought came suddenly, forcefully. This isn't real. This isn't what I want. "Fire," I gasped, an idea forming. "Mel, help me build up the fire, now." Together, we scrambled to feed our small camp stove with fuel, building the flame higher. The heat and light pushed back against the darkness, creating a barrier between us and the thing in the rain. The wailing outside changed, becoming angry, discordant. The figure retreated a step, then another, its form seeming to waver like smoke in the wind. "It's working," Melissa whispered, her eyes clearing further. "She doesn't like the fire." We fed the flame with everything combustible we could find. Spare clothing, the edges of our sleeping mats, pages torn from a paperback book in Melissa's pack. The fire grew, its light brightening our small shelter to near daylight levels. Outside, the figure retreated further, its outline becoming indistinct, merging with the curtains of rain. The singing faded, replaced by an inhuman howl of frustration that echoed through the forest. Then silence, except for the steady drumming of rain. "Is she gone?" Melissa asked, huddled close to the fire. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think we need to keep this fire going until dawn." We took turns watching and sleeping, maintaining the flame through the long hours of darkness. Each time the fire began to dim, the singing would start again, distant but drawing closer. Each time we built the flames higher, it would retreat once more. Dawn broke gray and misty, the rain finally easing to a gentle drizzle. No sign remained of our nocturnal visitor. No footprints, no tangible evidence that she had been anything more than a shared hallucination. But we knew better. "We need to get out of here," Melissa said, gathering her things with shaking hands. "Now." I nodded, stuffing my damp sleeping bag into its compression sack. "The alternate trail I found yesterday, the one that avoids the stream crossing. We stick to that, no matter what." We set out as soon as we'd packed, leaving the shelter behind without regret. The forest dripped around us, every surface shining with moisture. Small puddles dotted the trail, which we carefully circumnavigated, unwilling to touch even the smallest body of water. The alternate route proved more challenging than the main trail, less maintained, with deadfall and overgrowth creating obstacles. But it kept us away from the swollen stream, and that was all that mattered. By midday, the clouds had lifted somewhat, allowing occasional glimpses of watery sunlight. Our spirits rose with the improved weather, the horrors of the night seeming less immediate in the gray daylight. "How much farther?" Melissa asked during a brief rest stop. I consulted the map. 4 miles, maybe less. We're making good time despite everything. She nodded, taking a small sip from her water bottle, one of the few times either of us had dared to drink since the previous night's encounter. "Do you think it can follow us all the way to town?" "I hope not. Jack seemed to think we'd be safe once we reached civilization." "Jack," Melissa mused. "What's his story, do you think? How does he know so much about her?" "No idea, but I'm grateful he warned us, even if he was super creepy about it." We continued on, pushing through fatigue and the lingering effects of a nearly sleepless night. The trail gradually became better maintained as we approached more frequently traveled sections, raising our hopes that we were nearing the trailhead. Late afternoon found us descending through pine forest toward what our map indicated was the final mile before the parking area. The air felt lighter somehow, the oppressive atmosphere of the higher elevations giving way to something more ordinary. "We're going to make it," Melissa said, a note of genuine relief in her voice for the first time in days. That's when we heard the rushing water. It wasn't marked on our map, a small stream cutting across the trail, likely seasonal and normally insignificant. But the recent heavy rains had transformed it into a fast-flowing barrier perhaps 15 feet across and of indeterminate depth. "No," Melissa said, staring at the water with undisguised fear. "No, no, no. We can't cross that." I studied the stream, looking for options. Maybe there's a fallen log or a narrower point somewhere. We searched up and down the stream's edge, maintaining a careful distance from the water itself. The crossing looked slightly less daunting about 50 yards upstream, where the water spread wider but appeared shallower, flowing over a rocky bed. "I think we can ford it here," I said, pointing. "The water's probably only knee-deep." Melissa shook her head vehemently. "I'm not touching that water, Jen. Not after everything that's happened. We can't turn back now. The trailhead is less than a mile away. We're so close. There has to be another way around." But there wasn't. We had 2 choices: ford the stream or backtrack several miles to find another trail, which would mean spending another night in the forest. "Look," I said, trying a different approach. "It's still daylight. She seems strongest at night, near larger bodies of water. This is just a small stream, and we'll only be in it for a few seconds." Melissa bit her lip, looking from the water to the trail beyond. "I don't know. We stick together, hold hands the whole way across. If anything happens, anything at all, we run for the trailhead as fast as we can." After several minutes of tense discussion, Melissa finally agreed. We prepared methodically, tightening our pack straps and securing loose items. I found a sturdy stick to use as a probe for testing the depth before each step. "Ready?" I asked, taking Melissa's hand firmly in mine. She nodded, her face set with determination. "Together." We approached the water's edge cautiously. The stream burbled and splashed over rocks, seeming perfectly ordinary in the afternoon light. No singing, no sense of malevolent presence. Just water doing what water does. I stepped in first, gasping at the cold. The current pulled at my boots, but the rocky bottom provided reasonable footing. Melissa followed, gripping my hand so tightly it hurt. "It's okay," I called over the noise of the water. "Just a few more steps." We were midway across, the water reaching just above our knees, when Melissa suddenly froze. "Jen," she whispered, her face draining of color. "There's something in the water." I followed her gaze and felt my heart stop. Just beneath the surface, moving against the current, were shapes. Pale, human-like forms swimming with undulating motions like eels. They circled our legs, drawing closer with each pass. "Run!" I screamed, pulling Melissa toward the far bank. We splashed forward desperately, fighting the current and the treacherous footing. Something brushed against my calf. A hand, cold as death, fingers grasping at my pants leg. I kicked wildly, breaking free. Melissa screamed beside me. Looking over, I saw her being pulled downward, her hand slipping from mine as she was dragged beneath the surface. "Mel!" I plunged my arm into the water, searching frantically. My fingers found her jacket and I hauled upward with all my strength. Melissa's face broke the surface, her eyes wide with terror, gasping for breath. "Something's got my legs," she choked out. I wrapped both arms around her torso and pulled, bracing my feet against the rocky stream bed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like tearing cloth, Melissa came free. We staggered the remaining distance to the bank and collapsed on the muddy ground, trembling and soaked. "Are you hurt?" I gasped, checking her for injuries. Melissa shook her head, still fighting for breath. It felt like hands. Dozens of cold hands pulling me down. She looked back at the stream, now once again appearing perfectly ordinary. "They're still there, Jen. Waiting." "We're across now. That's all that matters." I helped her to her feet. "Can you walk?" She nodded, though she winced when putting weight on her right leg. "Let's get out of here, please." We moved as quickly as Melissa's injured leg would allow, following the trail as it wound downhill through thinning forest. Neither of us spoke, saving our breath for the journey, both driven by the overwhelming need to reach safety before dark. The trailhead parking lot appeared just as the sun dipped behind the mountains. My car sat where we'd left it, a beautiful sight after everything we'd endured. We threw our packs in the back and climbed in, Melissa's hands shaking so badly she could barely fasten her seatbelt. "Drive," she said simply. I didn't need to be told twice. The engine roared to life and I backed out, tires spraying gravel as we accelerated toward the main road. In the rearview mirror, I caught a final glimpse of the trailhead sign silhouetted against the darkening sky. We reached Cuesta as full darkness settled over the landscape. The town's scattered lights seemed like beacons of civilization and safety after our ordeal. We headed straight for the small motel at the edge of town, neither of us wanting to drive the additional hours back to Albuquerque that night. The elderly clerk at the motel barely raised an eyebrow at our bedraggled appearance as we requested a room. "Hikers, huh? Rough trip?" "You could say that," I replied, too exhausted for details. "Weather's been nasty up in the high country," he commented, sliding a key across the counter. "You're not the only ones who came back early. Had another fellow check in this morning. Looked even worse than you two." "Another hiker?" Melissa asked. "Was his name Chris, by any chance?" The clerk frowned, thinking. "Don't recall the name. Young guy, though. Said he got separated from his buddy up near Heart Lake. Real shook up about it." Melissa and I exchanged glances. Daniel's missing friend. It had to be. "Is he still here?" I asked. "Checked out couple hours ago. Seemed in a real hurry to put distance between himself and these mountains." The clerk studied us more carefully. "You folks run into trouble up there too?" "Just the weather," I lied smoothly. We thanked him and headed to our room, where we spent the next hour in the blessed luxury of hot showers and dry clothes. We ordered pizza from the only delivery place in town and ate in exhausted silence, each processing the events of the past few days in our own way. Later, as we lay in separate beds with the room's single lamp burning between us, neither of us willing to sleep in complete darkness, Melissa finally spoke. "We should report it, you know. What happened, what we saw. Maybe it would help explain those missing hikers." I stared at the water-stained ceiling. "Report what, exactly? That we were chased by a ghost? That there are things living in the water up there? They'd think we were crazy or on drugs. So we just say nothing? Let other hikers go up there unwarned?" "The locals know," I pointed out. "They have their warnings and their stories. Did we listen? No. We thought they were just superstitions." Melissa was quiet for a long moment. "I keep seeing her face, Jen. When I close my eyes and feeling those hands in the water." "Me too." I reached across the gap between our beds to squeeze her hand. "But we made it out. We're safe now." "Are we?" She turned to look at me, her expression troubled. "I keep thinking about what Jack said, that once she notices you, she doesn't let go easily." I had no answer for that. We eventually drifted into uneasy sleep, the lamp burning all night between us like a talisman against the darkness. The drive back to Albuquerque the next day was subdued. We spoke little, both lost in our own thoughts. The mountains receded in the rearview mirror, beautiful and innocent in the clear autumn light. Life gradually returned to normal over the following weeks. I went back to work, caught up with friends, watched TV, paid bills, all the mundane activities that make up ordinary existence, but something had changed inside me. I found myself avoiding bodies of water, taking showers instead of baths, declining invitations to beach trips, driving miles out of my way to avoid crossing bridges over rivers or lakes. Melissa and I spoke less frequently than before. When we did talk, we carefully avoided mentioning our trip, discussing work, relationships, TV shows, anything but what had happened in the mountains. It was as if by mutual, unspoken agreement, we had decided to pretend those events had never occurred. Until the dreams began. They started about a month after our return. Vivid nightmares of dark water closing over my head, of pale hands pulling me down into lightless depths, of a woman's voice singing a melody that made my soul ache with longing. I would wake gasping for breath, sheets soaked with sweat, the song still echoing in my mind. I didn't tell Melissa about the dreams, not wanting to burden her with my continuing trauma. But one night in late November, she called me at 3 a.m, her voice shaking. "Do you hear it too?" she asked without preamble. "Hear what?" I replied, though I already knew. "The singing, Jen. Her singing. In your dreams." I closed my eyes, a chill running through me despite the warmth of my apartment. "Yes. It's getting louder," Melissa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every night, a little closer. Last night I saw her standing at the foot of my bed. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. She just watched me. It's just dreams, Mal. Post-traumatic stress or something. Not real." "Is it? I found puddles in my apartment, Jen. Small ones, in places where there shouldn't be water. And my bathroom mirror fogs up when I'm not showering, like someone's been standing there, breathing on it." I had no response. Similar things had been happening in my own home. Unexplained dampness on the floor, the sound of dripping water when all faucets were off, the persistent smell of lake mud in rooms I'd just cleaned. "We need help," Melissa continued. "Professional help." "A psychiatrist, you mean?" "No." She hesitated. "I've been doing research. There's a woman in Santa Fe who specializes in this kind of thing. A kind of spiritual cleansing." Under normal circumstances, I would have scoffed at such a suggestion. But normal had ceased to exist somewhere back in those mountains. "I'll try anything at this point," I admitted. We made arrangements to meet in Santa Fe that weekend. The woman, Sofia Herrera, eau de curandera or traditional healer with a small practice near the plaza, listened to our story without interruption, her weathered face giving nothing away. When we finished, she nodded slowly. La Dama del Agua, the Lady of the Water. She is very old, very powerful. The Spanish missionaries tried to equate her with La Llorona, but she existed long before they came to this land. "Can you help us?" Melissa asked, hope and desperation mingling in her voice. "I can try," Sophia replied, "but understand, she has marked you both. Such a mark is not easily removed." The ritual that followed was a blend of Catholic prayer, indigenous ceremony, and things I had no context for understanding. It involved herbs burned in an abalone shell, prayers in Spanish and languages I didn't recognize, and water from a sacred spring that Sophia sprinkled over us with a bundle of dried plants. "Water cleanses water," she explained, "but this water is blessed, protected." At the ritual's conclusion, she gave each of us a small pouch to wear around our necks. Salt from the earth, silver that never touched water, sage and pinon resin. "Keep these with you always, especially when near water." "Will this stop the dreams?" I asked. Sophia looked at me with ancient eyes. "Perhaps. But remember this. She is patient. She has existed for centuries, and will exist for centuries more. Time means nothing to her. She can wait." "That's not very reassuring," Melissa said with a nervous laugh. "It is not meant to be. It is a warning." Sophia's expression softened slightly. "Live your lives, find joy where you can, but never forget what you encountered. Respect it, fear it, and never ever return to those mountains." We thanked her, paid her fee, and left with our protective pouches and a lingering sense of unease. On the drive back to Albuquerque, Melissa turned to me. "Do you think it worked?" "I don't know," I replied honestly. "I guess we'll find out when we sleep tonight." The dreams did subside after Sophia's ritual. Not completely. I still occasionally woke to the fading echoes of that haunting melody, but they became less frequent, less vivid. The strange water phenomena in my apartment ceased. Gradually, life truly did return to something approaching normal. Melissa and I resumed our friendship, though we never again discussed hiking trips or camping. Some traumas create an unbreakable bond. Others create a wall. Ours did both, connecting us through shared experience while simultaneously establishing boundaries around subjects we couldn't bear to discuss. A year passed. Then, two. I changed jobs, moved to a new apartment, dated a few men without things ever getting serious. Through it all, I wore Sophia's pouch beneath my clothes, a constant reminder of what lurked in the dark waters of the world. I was doing well, or thought I was, until the letter arrived. No return address, just my name and address in a spidery hand I didn't recognize. Inside was a single sheet of paper containing 5 words. "She still waits for you." That same day, Melissa called, her voice tight with controlled panic. "Did you get one too?" "A letter, yes, just now." "What do we do?" I thought about Jack Morgan, the hermit in the mountains who had seemed to know so much about the entity in the water. I thought about the missing hikers whose bodies were never found. I thought about the dreams that still sometimes woke me in the darkest hours of the night. "We live our lives," I said finally, echoing Sophia's words. "We find joy where we can. We wear our protective pouches and stay away from dark water." "And if that's not enough?" Melissa asked softly. I had no answer for that. I still don't. Sometimes, on rainy nights when water streams down my windows and thunder shakes the sky, I think I hear a woman singing a melody almost remembered from another life. I pull my blankets tighter, touch the pouch around my neck, and wait for dawn. Because I know the truth now. Some things are ancient beyond reckoning, patient beyond human understanding. They exist in the dark places of the world, in the depths of waters that have never seen sunlight. They wait, they watch, and once they know your name, they never truly let you go. She is out there still, La Dama del Agua, waiting in Heart Lake, in rain puddles, in the water that flows from my tap, waiting for me to lower my guard, to forget what I learned in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, waiting for the day I return to dark water. And sometimes, in my weakest moments, I find myself longing for that day too, to hear her song one last time, to follow where it leads, to finally understand what waits beneath the surface of this world, in the places humans were never meant to go. My name is Jennifer Williams, and I am marked by something older than history. This is my warning to you. Be careful in the wild places, in the shadow of ancient mountains. Listen to local legends. Respect them. And when camping near dark water in the wilderness, if you hear a woman singing in the night, run. Run and don't look back. Because some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, and some songs aren't meant to be heard by the living.